Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call a meeting to order of the Los Gatos Joint Town Council, Parking Authority, and Redevelopment Agency meeting of May 7th, 2007. I'd ask if the clerk call roll, please.
Council agency members Mike Wasserman.
Here.
Diane McNutt.
Here.
Barbara Spector.
Here.
Steve Glickman.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Joe Przenski.
Here. As is our tradition, we have one of the future leaders of our community with us tonight, Christy Sutherland, a Los Gatos resident and 8th grader at Hillbrook School, is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance as part of our special Future Leaders program. This is designed to integrate our local youth within the public process. Christy is co-head of the student government at Hillbrook and is a nationally ranked equestrian rider who supports a nonprofit organization called Taking the Reins, an organization that teaches underprivileged teenage girls leadership, teamwork, and how to ride horses. So, Christy, if you'd join us, and ladies and gentlemen, if we'd stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Let's hear it for Christy. Thank you very much, Christy. Next item on our agenda is closed session report. I'd ask the attorney if there's anything to report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. Council did meet in closed session tonight concerning ongoing litigation, Neymark et al. Versus City of San Jose et al. This is a conference with legal counsel. Direction was given to legal counsel. No final actions were taken. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Corum. We now have the appointments of board and commissions, and we have two appointments to engage in tonight, our Personnel Board and our Rent Advisory Committee. And I'd ask the clerk to please conduct that appointment.
Okay, for the Personnel Board, we have Robert Fabella and Marlon.
Well, do you want to introduce what we're going to do here? That would
Okay.
That would be a good idea.
I'm sorry. We're going to vote by raise of the hands. We have two appointments and two vacancies. Robert Fabella is the first one.
Thank you, Robert Fabella.
The second is Marlon Rasmussen. Okay. For the Rent Advisory Committee, we have Pam Allison. There's one vacancy and one applicant. Pam Allison. Okay, thank you. So that fills all the commissions. We'll be re-advertising for the Arts Commission and the Transportation and Parking.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we have a couple of presentations to make tonight, and the first presentation is for the National Public Works Week. Before we have our interim Parks and Public Works Director come forward, I just want to announce that we are celebrating National Public Works Week in Los Gatos to honor the men and women in our communities and across the nation who provide and maintain the infrastructure and services collectively known as public works. The Los Gatos Parks and Public Works Department invites you to attend one of its open houses that will occur on Wednesday, May 23rd at our service center located at 41 Miles. This will be a great opportunity for all of the community to learn about current and future infrastructure projects and understand how town equipment, vehicles, and facilities are used to serve the town. If you would like to be a participant in this open house on May 23rd, please contact our Parks and Public Works Department to select a tour and make a reservation. So with that, I'm going to ask our interim director of Parks and Public Works, Kevin Rohani, to join me at the podium. I am honored to make this proclamation on behalf of the Town Council. Whereas the public works services provided in our community are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, and whereas the support of an understanding and informed citizenry is vital to the efficient operation of public works systems and programs such as transportation, public safety, streets and highways, and public buildings, and whereas the health, safety, and comfort of this community greatly depends on these facilities and services, and whereas the quality and effectiveness of these facilities as well as their planning, design, and construction is vitally dependent upon the efforts and skills of public works and officials, and whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff public works departments is materially influenced by the people's attitudes and understanding of the importance of the work they perform. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Joe Brzezinski, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the town of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim May 20th to 26th, 2007 as National Public Works Week within the town of Los Gatos, and call upon all citizens and civil organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and recognize the contributions these public works officials make every day to ensure our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. Proclaimed the 7th day of May, 2007, Town of Los Gatos, County of Santa Clara, State of California, Joe Brzezinski, Mayor. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. On behalf of the department, I accept this proclamation, and we encourage and invite everybody to come to the Public Works Week and our open house that's going to be on the May 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And now I'd ask our neighbor mayor, David Baxter from the city of Montessorino, to come forward. We have to say a few words in proclamation for our neighbor city. Whereas the city of Montessorino, a community of nearly 4,000 residents, is known for its rural character, wooded hillsides, and magnificent estates. And whereas the city of Montessorino has many historical points of interest and was home to American author John Steinbeck and the site of the Billy Jones Railroad. And whereas the city of Montessorino is known for its collective working relationship with adjacent communities and regularly partners with the town of Los Gatos on key community and public safety issues. And whereas the city of Montessorino, founded by Admiral Thomas Ingalls, was incorporated as a city on May 14th, 1957. And whereas May 14th, 2007 marks the 50th anniversary of the city of Montessorino. And whereas the city of Montessorino has earmarked the year 2007 as a time of celebration in recognition of its 50th anniversary. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Joe Brzezinski, by virtue of the authority vested in me as the mayor of the town of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate to congratulate the city of Montessorino on its 50th anniversary. Proclaim the 7th day of May, 2007, town of Los Gatos, County of Santa Clara, State of California. Signed, Joe Brzezinski, mayor of the town of Los Gatos. David.
Thank you very much, Mayor. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to accept this proclamation on behalf of all the good folks of Montessorino. And we do have a year of celebration coming up. It begins actually this Saturday morning. We have a fun run, which is open to the public and starts at Montessorino City Hall. And we'll have what will hopefully be truly a fun run, about 2.5 miles through Montessorino and ending in Oak Meadow Park. And if anyone is interested in joining us, there's information on the city's website and also at our city hall. And then in the afternoon, we have a 50th anniversary picnic, and I trust that the council has received invitations for that, and we certainly invite you and hope that you can join us as Montessorino celebrates. And then later in the year, we're going to have a film festival, which will be held at the theater in downtown Los Gatos, since Montessorino does not have our own. That should be fun. That'll be in the fall, and we'll have a series of films that are from the period, from 1957. So again, I thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and to the council. Appreciate it. Thanks.
And I promised the mayor that I would meet him at the end of the fun run to welcome him into Oak Meadow Park at around 3 o'clock or so. Thank you, David, very much. Yes, Mr. Wassman?
You're meeting him at the end because you're finishing ahead of him?
You can interpret that however you wish.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Would you hand me that? Now, we have one more presentation to make, okay? And it's a good segue into the evening's very significant activity. We have again received the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. Okay? And this was presented to the town of Los Gatos for fiscal year that began July 1st, 2006. And I'd ask that our Finance Director, Steve Conway, come forward. Congratulations, Steve, one more time.
Thank you. On behalf of the Finance Department, all the town staff, thank you, and we continue to refine and make this document, in my professional opinion, a better document every year. And our goal is to be as transparent as we can to the public.
Thank you, Steve. Let's hear it for Steve. And all right, I believe that's all of the presentations for the night. What I would like to do now is open up for consent. And if you look at our agenda for tonight, we have a number of items on consent. I'd ask, is there any member of council who would like to pull an item from consent? Seeing none. Any member of the public? Mr. Davis? Okay, items 3 and 9 will be pulled. Okay. Seeing none. Others. I'd ask that we approve the consent calendar with items 3 and 9 to be heard. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Except for number 4, I'll be voting no.
Okay, and it's noted that the Vice Mayor is voting no on number 4. So we will hear items 3 and 9 at the end of the session. Okay, that brings us to our public hearings. No, it doesn't. It brings us to our verbal communication. And this is an opportunity for any member of the audience, any member of our public, to speak to the council for up to 3 minutes on items that are not currently on tonight's agenda. And what I would like to offer the opportunity to the public, if you have not yet done so and you want to speak to us about this item or any other item on the agenda, please take one of the buff cards and fill that out and give it to our clerk on my left. We have one card for public forum. That's Mr. Davis, Ray Davis, Citizen Ray.
Yes. Well, I wanted to come down and speak, even though we probably have no audience out there. They've probably already tuned in, to the Warriors game. But that's okay. We'll carry on, as we always do, okay? But then again, the game doesn't start for half an hour. So, please stick with us if you don't mind. I'd like to offer first a number of us in the community are working busily to save the mountain, our gorgeous mountain that overlooks the town. No Name Mountain, if you can believe it. I still can't believe it. As one of the members of Save Mount Diablo, I've seen what a group of citizens can do in respect to saving a mountain. So I want to start with a name for the mountain. The name, Montaña de Casa de las Gatas. Freely translated, Cat House Mountain. Cat House Mountain. What a dynamic name. It tells exactly what's going on. A mountain where everything is for sale. everything is for sale up there. Just another real estate development in the minds of certain of the council here, okay? With that in mind, I want to tell you, speak to Mrs. McNutt. Now, Mrs. McNutt has challenged the veracity of my statements about what she said on the public record. And I double-checked it again to make sure that I was right, and I was 100% correct, and Mrs. McNutt is 100% wrong. Mrs. McNutt used the words, I have a personal, or words to that effect, I have a personal interest in estate-sized homes, 10,000 to 11,000 square foot. And you left that out, Mrs. McNutt, of your public record statement. And you need to review it again, because I want to tell you, the law provides that once you've taken the oath of office, which you've taken, if you make a significant statement that is false, that involves your work, you can be charged with a crime. Charged with a crime. I hope you're aware of that, okay? Because the grand jury is waiting, as is the district attorney. So I urge you to get straight on the matter. Get straight, please. I hate to be the hangman on your political career.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. There are no other cards for verbal communications, so that closes that portion of the meeting and brings us to our public hearings. And tonight, we're going to start with the operating and capital budgets. Our job in this public hearing is to consider the town of Los Gatos' proposed operating capital budget for fiscal year 2007-2008. And we are going to, I believe, have opening comments by our manager, Ms. Fagoni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Tonight, staff is very pleased to present to you the proposed 2007-2008 operating budget and the 2007-2012 five-year capital improvement program. We will begin with the operating budget and then move to the capital budget. Since we know that council always does their homework, staff will keep our comments brief so there's sufficient time for your questions. Steve Conway, our finance director, will provide an overview of the financial plan for next fiscal year. And then department managers will present their budgets by briefly highlighting the key changes which are proposed for next year. We will then respond to council questions department by department, and we would suggest that you take questions or public testimony from the public at the end after all the presentations have been made and council questions have been answered. This is the town manager's proposed budget. If council concurs with what has been presented, we will return to you on June 4th with a resolution that you would approve to adopt the budget. If there is additional direction provided to staff tonight or any questions that we can't respond to that we will need to bring back to you, we will do so at that point in time. In this regard, I would like to point out 3 areas that are addressed in the staff report, which is included as item 10 on tonight's agenda. You received it at the time that you received your budget 2 weeks ago. And I would like to point out that a couple of the attachments which you did receive but were omitted from the memo in your packet are available as desk items, but the council did receive those earlier. So I would like to highlight a few areas that are in that memo. First of all, there is a funding request from the United Way for 211 services. 211 is a 3-digit phone number which connects people who call that number with human and social services in the county. This is a relatively new service in the county. And as such, United Way has made a request of all cities for a certain allocation of funding. The town's level of request was $5,000. Since United Way was not able to get us a proposal during our community grant process, we did feel it was important to, first of all, present to you their request and make a good faith recommendation of one-time funding at the level of $2,500 for the town to show its commitment to the program, but also to give the United Way time before the next funding cycle, next fiscal year, to provide us with some additional information about the program. So certainly council has a few options. One, you could fund it at $5,000, the requested level. You could accept staff's recommendation of $2,500. Certainly you could pass this year or anything in between. Right now, again, we're recommending $2,500, and if you concur, we would bring that back to you in the resolution on June 4th. The second area noted in the memo is that during your retreat this year, you referred the question of what the town funds in the way of senior and youth services to the general plan update process. And what you determined is that you would like an inventory of those services as a precursor to the actual general plan update process. So what we intend to do with that direction is to identify for you the scope of that work as a part of the work plan that we'll bring back to you in the fall, which would then initiate the general plan process. And then finally, A Place for Teens, as you know, is a nonprofit organization in town that's responsible for fundraising that supports teen services at the venue, which are delivered by the Recreation District. And as you also know, the A Place for Teens has had some financial problems. In your packet, there's a letter from Jeff Miller indicating the agency's commitment to strengthen its board and to take its fundraising to a new level. As Regina will likely point out, there is $12,000 allocated in this proposed budget as a community grant for the venue, and at this point in time there are no additional funds being requested by A Place for Teens. So staff will proceed as outlined unless alternative direction is provided by the council this evening. And so that will conclude my comments, but before I turn it over to Steve, I would like to take this time to thank all the department directors and all the staff who've been involved with delivering this balanced budget to you this evening. There are really too many for me to mention here, but they are listed in at the end of the transmittal letter of the operating budget. But I do need to say that Steve Conway, our finance director, has been an outstanding steward of our town finances. His expert guidance to us all is a major reason why the town is in such great financial shape after 5 very difficult budget years, and I think that you will come to that same conclusion, and I know that you already have, but I hope the public will also as you hear tonight's presentation. So thank you, Steve. And unless there are some questions for me, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Questions, the manager, on the introduction? Mr. Glickman?
Just one very briefly. Yeah, as you correctly mentioned, the council had raised the question of getting to know a little bit more in detail about the nature and magnitude of our services for youth and seniors. And as I read and have heard what you said tonight, the plan is to present as part of the work plan in the fall a plan for telling us sometime in the future. And I appreciate that it's going to be done. I would have hoped that it could be done a bit more expeditiously than that because, as my fellow council members indicated, this is a matter of some interest. So if it would be possible to perhaps move forward with that a little more expeditiously, this council member would appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. Any other comments or questions for the manager? Then let's move on to our budget overview with our director, Steve Conway.
Thank you, Mayor Brzezinski, members of council, members of the public. I think our town manager has already gone through this agenda, but our agenda tonight is to review quickly the 5-year plan, which was our update of the 5-year financial plan, which we had previously updated to council about a month or two ago for our mid-year. I'll be touching briefly on that. Then we'll be getting into our operating budget highlights and the latest on the state budget as we know it with the information we have available to us at this time. And then the departments will be presenting their highlights of their budgets, followed by questions and answers if those are required. And then we'll move into the capital improvement, 5-year capital improvement plan. So I would like to just touch briefly in the interest of time on the 5-year forecast. That set the stage for developing the fiscal year 2007-08 budget. So as I mentioned at our mid-year, we did factor in some moderate recoveries, which we're seeing trends that are on some of our key revenues, such as property tax, our TOT, and other tax revenues, sales tax, are growing, and they're keeping pace with our estimates. So we have around 4 to 5% in our revenue side, and that is a fairly conservative estimate. We've been beating that. Last year we beat that in most categories, but we take a pretty conservative approach on that because of the tenuousness of the locally generated sales tax is one example. And on the revenue assumptions we made regarding the state budget have not changed since mid-year. The latest information we have is that the governor in January proposed funding the COPS grant, which is $100,000 for the town, $100,000 for Montessorino. The town receives both of those. And there are new transportation fundings available. Prop 1B has around $185,000 in new revenues next year for transportation. And then in the following fiscal year, Prop 42 revenues will kick in around $150,000 per year, not in 07-08, but in 08-09. And there's limited other new, well, I'd say new funding if it were truly new, but it's a reinstatement of funding we used to receive for state mandated costs, and those are in the governor's budget. And the governor's May revised budget will be out in probably the next week, and we will see if there's any significant changes which alter any of our assumptions. Right now, we don't have word that there are any significant changes to those assumptions we had as of the January governor's budget. On the expenditure side, once again, we have in our 5-year forecast assumed a moderate growth in our expenditures, and those relate to salary and benefit changes as part of negotiated increases where we have those. And if we do not have those, we made some conservative assumptions about growth rates in those areas. And we've updated all of our benefit costs with the best information we have available for future growth rates in the benefits such as health insurance and that sort of thing. So those were all built in. So that set the stage for seeing where we were at. And I wanted to show once again, this was a graph that was available at mid-year. But this shows you that the forecast still continues to show that we cannot rest on our laurels, that we, right now, if all things being equal and the rates that we've got built in, we still show that we have more work to do if the revenues remain as predicted and our expenditures, our structural organization remains the same, that in year 10,011, fiscal year 10,011, we may have another shortfall in the operating revenues where the lines would cross. This is not news to us. We've been dealing with this, and what I will say is, since we know we have some conservative revenue forecasts in there, there's a good chance that potentially, if property tax were to return 11 and 12% rates like it did recently, then when you have, some more conservative estimates out there, there's a potential that those out-year shortfalls could push out even further. So it's a bit of a moving target, but this is the best information we have right now. So our goal was to craft a budget that for 07-08 that recognizes this reality, and I would say that we have done an excellent job in recognizing this reality, preserving the services that we have right now. We haven't augmented them except in some very limited cases. And during the crafting of this budget, we took advantage of opportunities to, if we had retirements and that sort of thing, to try to still deliver the same service level, but try to cut the cost of that service delivery where we could, and we did do that in this proposed budget. So we are very aware that we have those out years where more may be required. We haven't lost sight of the ball, and that'll be something we constantly monitor as we move forward. I think I already have spoken to this, but once again, as I said, that unless we do make changes over the long term and our estimates remain as they are projected to be, we would have a 10-11 shortfall that we would have to deal with. However, we do know that is potentially a moving target. The fiscal year 2007-08 budget does fund the current service levels that the community is receiving as of this fiscal year. There are some limited augmentations to that where there were some inefficiencies or some service deficiencies out there that we tried to address that were unacceptable. And you'll hear more from the departments in some cases where those augmentations did occur. They were very limited, but they were in some real critical key areas where we did suggest that we increase funding to address some of those service deficiencies, and the departments will discuss that in their departmental presentations. We have other increases that were inescapable from a cost of service delivery viewpoint, and those were things, we had some fixed contracts and that sort of thing, things with our lab, for instance, with the county crime lab, and those things that have inflationary increases built into them, and those were incorporated into the proposed budget. As I mentioned earlier, as we craft the budget, we have certain cost categories that cost of energy and those sort of things that just have an inflationary aspect to them that's pretty hard to avoid. So you're going to have some natural increase in expenditure budget just because of that fact. But wherever we could, we did seize on any opportunities as we proposed a budget for next year to continue to align our organization long-term with the revenue stream. We were always looking, that was something that was always a goal, yet still try to maintain as many of the services as we could for the public. So I'm very pleased to say that based on our current 07-08 estimates, we have a slight moderate operating revenue above expenditure situation. We have $31,563,000 in total sources of revenue in the general fund, and our general fund expenditures are $30,597,000. So I'm very pleased that we do show, if all goes according to plan, that we should have some excess revenue available in next year's budget that will then roll to either the Revenue Stabilization Reserve or to the Capital Projects Reserve. This pie is a little hard to read on the screen, but that is a breakout of all the departmental expenditures of the $30.5 million, where that all falls. And I guess a good thing for the public to understand is a significant part of the general fund expenditures are to provide the community with public safety, which is approximately 40% of our budget. And the next biggest category would be the Parks and Public Works, which is our transportation system and our parks. Both very important to the community, and both a significant factor in our overall budget. Talking a little bit about what we realize and recognize as part of the budget in terms of what we know are potential vulnerabilities. We do have always the potential for a local revenue downturn. Our sales tax mix, which we talked about at mid-year, is a concern. We have one of our sales tax contributors composing nearly 22% of our sales tax revenue. So that is a concern. We would generally like to see not exceed 10% as a rule of thumb. So that is always something we'll be watching. And the governor's May revised budget is not out, so as I mentioned, the COPS grant, which is in there right now, those are always subject to the whims somewhat of the political process, along with the transportation funding and some other state revenue funding, which is never a for sure deal until the budget is passed by the state. So that's always out there, but we'll be tracking that very closely. I want to discuss a little bit about our cash balances. This has been a question that's come up from the public in recent months, and I'm going to be addressing, this is not the current cash position. The current cash position is more than this, but this is I wanted to use an audited cash balance just to talk about it conceptually. And so I'm going to refer to the $66 million in cash that's on the town balance sheet and the audited cash balance on June 30, 2006. That's the last date we have an audit prepared. And we'll have another one this June 30, 2007. And the $66 million is, I want to discuss what that really consists of. There's 16 million of that 66 million in cash, which is designated per council policy for specific purposes. And this I would liken to a home budget if you set aside money for your children's tuition plans or tuition for college. This is money that has a designated specific use. When it's time for your young child to go off to college, you will have sufficient funds available in this reserve to pay for their first or couple years of college. So that is the money, and that 16 million are the reserve for future and special projects and other general fund reserves that the council policy has specifically designated for specific uses. An additional amount is the 16.1 million of legally committed or restricted monies, and those funds are legally restricted in that they cannot be used for any other purpose than the exact designation for which they have been set aside. And what I would say about those funds is they are just not available for appropriation for any other use. We have 11.4 million of that 66 million, which is in our internal service funds. Those monies are set aside much like you would set aside, and I'm not saying I do this, but as a homeowner, if a financial best practice that I might do is set aside a certain amount of my monthly income to repair my roof, which I know when the winter rains come will eventually need replacement. And if I was disciplined enough to do that, when the water started to drip down my wall, I would know, oh, that's very good. I was so disciplined. I will call the roofing contractor and get him out here, he or she out here, and start my roof repair, and I would have my money set aside for that. Well, our 11.4 million in our various internal service funds is exactly for that reason. Our equipment replacement fund has about 3 million of that, and that is used to replace our police, primarily for our police fleet and our public works vehicles. Those vehicles have a 3 to 4 or 5 year life, and based on their life expectancy, we replace those with that cash. So that's a financial best practice that's done nationwide. There's approximately 3.8 million in GFAR monies, which is our programmed capital project money. It's part of the 5-year CIP. It's all been programmed out over 5 years, and it's there and funding the 5-year CIP program. So it is committed. It can be reprogrammed to another project or away from that use, but for the moment, at this point in time, that 3.8 million was in the GFAR fund, and it was all programmed out over 5 years for some of our critical infrastructure needs. And then we have 19.6 million in reserve for special purpose uses, and the bulk of that, around 13 million of that, is our redevelopment agency cash, which is very limited. It's limited in its legal use, and it's also limited in where it can be used. It can only be used in projects within the redevelopment project area. So I just wanted to cover that. There's been questions about that cash balance, and I just wanted to run that by the council just to, and the public also, so that they could get a clear understanding of that balance. The redevelopment agency highlights, we have a status quo budget for the RDA. That budget is composed primarily of 90% of this budget is tax increment pass-throughs to the school districts and other taxing agencies when the agency was formed, and the annual debt service on the outstanding COP issue. That's 90% of the expenditures, 80 to 90%. And there's a small 15 or so % in the admin side, and also some small capital project work, because most of our COP funding, we've spent most of it down. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm open for questions from the mayor or council at your pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. As usual, a very thoroughgoing analysis. I have a question. What college are you sending your child to that's going to cost $16 million?
She's actually going to the University of Washington. She's paying out-of-state tuition, which I'm very disappointed about.
Okay. Questions from council. Mr. Glickman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, an excellent report and very clear as always. Just a few questions about some of the things we've touched on. As you project property tax revenue into the next, say, 5 years, it would seem to me that the demographics would have a great deal to do with that because of the tremendous influence of Prop 13.
Right.
If people are going to stay put and keep their Prop 13 protection, we see one curve and it's fairly low and flat. If we see some significant turnover, especially with people who are not bringing a Prop 13 exemption with them, it's a very different picture. So if there is such information available that you've used or might have available to you, I would think it would be of interest to the council to know what that picture looks like as we go into the future. I know it's a somewhat detailed issue, but it also tells us a lot about the town that we're going to be serving in that time. So if that information is available, not tonight necessarily, I would appreciate having a look at it.
Thank you, Councilmember Glickman. That is information. We did have a recent, when we were looking at the county unincorporated pockets near the town limits, we looked at around 400 parcels, and I believe a little over half of them were still at pre-Prop 13 assessment levels, and so we know that I would assume that there's a similar correlation if you probably looked within the town limits. So there's still an inventory of homes that will turn over eventually, and I think that has been fueling some of our more than 4 to 5% annual growth that we would normally see. And I share the same concern, and I would like, we actually have a request into the county assessor. They have just transferred their assessor's database over to a more modern system, and they're hoping to be able to provide us with more complete information parcel by parcel. Right now, just for the public to know, when we get parcel by parcel information, we have to go in individually and look up a parcel number. Online, you can do that, but it's a very laborious process. They do not have it automated yet, but that is one of their goals, and we have a request in for that because we would love that information ourselves.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that because it has a lot to do with our ability to predict where we're going to stand. It's a big chunk of our money. If I may, Mr. Mayor, go into the question of the reserves, and there indeed were some questions. I raised some of them. Just for clarification, based on what you told us, and I really appreciate it, it was fairly clear to me that of that 66 million audited, that the 16.1 that's legally committed we can't play with, so that's frozen, and probably what's reserved for financial best practices we would be ill-advised to mess around with. But that leaves us with 16 million that the council has designated, but which presumably we could reconsider. And then the 19.6 million, which is RDA money, which, as I understand it, as long as we stay within the legal bounds of what can be done with RDA money, we have some flexibility with. So I would understand from this today, it seems that we're in a very good place in terms of our reserves. And I'm going to ask a follow-up question about that. But that it does also appear that we do have some depth and, if the council wished, some flexibility in what we might do. The follow-up question was, and I'm going back to my school board days, when I remember the state said you must have a certain percentage of your operating budget in reserve. And I know that was applicable to school districts. Is there any similar guideline about if we have a $30 million operating budget, what is considered appropriate or safe or recommended in terms of reserves, in terms of percentage?
The town attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Glickman, but I don't believe there's a state mandate on local government for any required percentage of operating fund reserve. However, I will say that a rule of thumb used to be around 15% of your operating budget. So in our case, that would be around $4.5 million, which is close to our reserve for economic uncertainty. Our reserves do exceed that amount.
One might say.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like Steve to clarify one thing because Councilmember Glickman's correct. Of the fund balances or the reserves that Steve mentioned and put in kind of household terms, I believe, Steve, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that the actual reserve amount is for current RDA debt service and low and moderate housing, and those could not be touched. I think, though, what you are referring to, Council Member, is we still have some bonding capacity for RDA for future projects, and right now that's not shown on the balance books, but we would have to bond for by 2011. And right now, our projections, and I think we cite this in the transmittal message, is somewhere between $13 and $15 million worth that could be available for future projects that we'd have to bond for by 2011.
And Mr. Mayor, if I might, I thank the town manager for reminding me that indeed we are looking only, and that's that audited $66 million in cash in hand. Right. But and on top of that, we have some bonding capacity, which we might want to consider use it or lose it.
Right. And this cash in hand is committed, so it's that second piece that I referred to that would be the use it or lose it component.
Okay. Although, of course, those are commitments as of the town council's policy. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. McNutt first, and then Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. I was going to say I just have one quick question, but I may have a second one. So let me give you my one quick question first. I was doing comparison on the reserve accounts between last year and this year to see how much they've changed. And I noticed that, for example, the account on the sale of the sewer system to West Valley Sanitation stayed the same. So my question is, the interest that is earned on the reserve accounts, is that scooped up and put into the general fund? Because I see it's not allocated to the individual reserves.
Unless, council member, unless required by law to do so, our reserves do not earn interest. That all that cash is in the general fund interest earned, which is our operating revenue. So you are correct.
Okay.
It doesn't increase the balance.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question that I think I just had is I need clarification on RDA, because I think I heard two different things between what the manager said and what Mr. Glickman said. My reading and understanding is on the current RDA money, with the exception of about $300,000, putting aside the housing, but we only have about $300,000 left because that other money has been spent on all those projects that we did downtown. So when we say committed, it's like it's spent. It's not we can change our minds now and say we don't want to pave Main Street after all.
Correct. It's encumbered because we've committed it. We're paying the bills, and there's a little amount left,
About
which is
300,000.
programmed in the CIP.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as a certified financial planner, I wanted to get a little clarification on the last comment that was tossed around saying use it or lose it. And from my perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Conway, and Madam Manager, if we use it, we then owe more. When we say use it or lose it, we're talking about borrowing more for a special project, and then we owe more. If we don't use it, we don't owe it. And if we don't use it, we don't owe interest. So if we need to use it, it's simply increasing our line of credit, if you will, borrowing more. But it's not use it or lose it like we have a gift of money that if we don't use, we have to give back. We are allowed to borrow more money. Am I correct?
Councilmember Wasserman, I think we have a couple of correct opinions out on the table tonight. Yours is correct as also there is a little bit of a use it or lose it component, and that's because it's redevelopment funds. And the interesting thing about redevelopment funds are that the only way that increment can be used, the tax increment generated in a project area, can only be used to pay one type of cost, and that is debt, repayment of debt. So if you don't use it and issue debt, the increment that's collected from 2011 to 2032 theoretically would not be available for any other use. It can only be used to repay debt. So when there's a comment made about a use it or lose it scenario, it is, well, you try to figure out your future collections of tax increment and then what size of bond issue would you need to issue to maximize your use of that increment over the next 20 years. And pay that, since that increment can only be used to repay debt, you try to match those two. So there is a little bit of an element of that.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
And for our layman listeners out there, when we say issue more debt, that is the equivalent of borrow more.
Correct. And that would be redevelopment-only debt secured by redevelopment-only funding.
Okay. I just wanted to get away from that. We're not using the word borrowing. We're not using the term payback. We're not using the term interest. And we all know about the national debt problem. We know about our state-owned debt problem. I won't get into the debt problem of our sister cities, but I just wanted to make sure that when we were talking about that we have the right or the ability to issue more debt, it means we have the right or ability to borrow more. We have the right or ability to charge more, if you will, to put it out there in the layman's terms.
Correct, and if why we refer to the 2011 year is that state law after December 15th, 2011 will no longer allow the agency to issue new public debt in a form of a bond issue beyond that date. So the only debt that the agency could take on or repay with this increment, that's the only way the money can be used in the future is to repay debt. It's a little complicated, but RDA money can only be used to repay debt. If a public bond issue was not issued, then there would only be one other mechanism, theoretically, for the RDA to incur debt, and that would be a loan from the town. So it would be subject to the town's ability to loan the agency money and have the agency use their increment to pay the town back. So when we go to the public market with a bond issue, you know, to the underwriters, this national securities dealers, we're able to tap a much larger capital market out there, receive more money in hand, and then pay it off over time with the tax increment.
Okay, I'll let this die. All I'm trying to say is when we're saying to the public, when we go out to the public for more money, we need to throw in somewhere the understanding of when we go to borrow more.
Yes.
Because when we go to the public, that's borrowing. When we issue debt, that's borrowing. And along with borrowing comes interest and everything else. Correct. And we're pledging our future income to pay back that debt. The bottom line is, do we need to borrow anymore? Do we need to issue any more debt? And that, I think, is what really drives. We don't spend money because the clock is ticking. We spend money because it's necessary. And then we borrow that money which we spend under the best terms possible. Thank you.
I would agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. Vice Mayor Spector?
That was actually Mr. Wasserman.
What did I say? Glickman? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Vice Mayor Spector?
Wasserman, Glickman.
Got it.
Okay. This is a question either for the town manager or for Mr. Conway, and it's my bigger picture kind of question. First of all, for me, and I think probably for the other people up here, all of the expenditures that are being suggested are worthwhile. They benefit our town. But the bigger picture question for me, and I think that it's one that is good to explain to our audience, the audience that's out there not watching basketball or the Sharks, is we know or we assume based on what you told us that at some juncture in the not too distant future our expenditures will exceed our revenue. We don't know exactly when that will be, but you project in the 2010, 2011. Given that, how do we justify to the town and to ourselves increasing our expenditures both for our operating and for our capital budgets as opposed to holding back because we are going to be crossing this line of expenditures exceeding revenues?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that. Our goal in crafting this budget was to be very realistic about our forecast and be as, face the facts of what does our revenue picture look like, and we believe we did that. We have done that. We know that we were fairly conservative on our revenue projections. We have seen our revenues, and I'm very happy to report this, outperform our conservative assumptions. This may occur in the future, so we don't want to, our goal was not to be cutting back and be in a cutback mode and not see this materialize. It wouldn't be fair to the community to be reducing services on what could be considered sort of a conservative assumption about the future. If we're pleasantly surprised like we've been the past couple of years, as I mentioned, the lines crossing will probably put, if we beat those estimates, it will push that gap, that year that there's a gap out. Could be 1 more, 2 more years, 3 more years out. That's always a potential out there. Recognizing that, then we started looking at, okay, if we have a current service level that the community desires, and we believe we have the operating funds, as I mentioned, we have right now our budget has $1 million surplus in it. You just saw we're close to around 900,000 surplus if our revenues hold for next year. So it would seem fair to build a budget that preserves the service levels we have. We have a surplus for next year, recognizing that we know we have more work to do. And I think what our strategy was is to preserve these services to the community, including the vital capital work that we're doing. All the, as I mentioned to the manager, we've put a lot of money into the pavement and the infrastructure of this town, multi-millions in the past 7 or 8 years. I think close to $20 million has been invested in our infrastructure, which is evident all around town. If you look at the street condition, has been vastly improved. So we've been making a lot of what I would say trading some of that cash for solid investments in the future of the community on infrastructure that will have a long life, 25 years. So we feel very positive about that investment. And then looking at the operating budget, knowing that we've got an out year issue, I think what this allows us to do is preserve our service levels the way they are. The community is very appreciative of that. And as we move forward in the budget years to come, we are not losing sight of the fact that we do have this situation potentially out there, and we will right-size the budget and align the budget as necessary to move through into the future. The current structure that the town has may or may not be sustainable, but we believe we've done the work and we know our operation well enough that we could make the changes on the fly if we need to. We've done a lot of that inventory already in our service level inventories. So we're ready, and we're hoping that day will not come. Our goal, and one of the things I take personally, is let's try to push that. Let's hope that day never comes. But if it ever does come, the town's ready.
All right, and just a reminder to all of us that there are a number of presenters yet to come in this section of the meeting. Mr. Glickman.
Very, very briefly, because as Mr. Washington indicated, we spent a bit of time talking about the RDA, and he's absolutely right that money you borrow is money that you borrow. You have to pay it back. And I know that you can talk for hours on this, but we're not asking you to. An RDA, a redevelopment agency, as we understand, and probably maybe the people who are listening, it's just 3 letters, have certain fiscal advantages to a town that normal funding doesn't have. And again, maybe because for the benefit of people who are listening, very briefly, if you could maybe just give people a sense of what some of the special circumstances of an RDA are, so they'll understand what we're talking about.
Special circumstances in terms of its purpose.
Right. Well, because we can get money in an RDA situation that we can't from normal property tax or other revenues. And the town attorney can correct me if I say anything in error here, but my best understanding is that the principal purpose for tax increment that's received in a tax increment project area is to remove blight. That is and within the definition of blight, and why our project area was formed in 1989 or shortly thereafter from the earthquake, was to deal with the blighted downtown structures that were adversely impacted by the Loma Prieta quake. So all of our activity must be focused to remove those blighted conditions and infrastructure that has blight in the project area.
And Mr. Mayor, let me just add to that, and Mr. Conway is always right, so I have nothing to correct. But the way that I think what Mr. Glickman is getting to is how the special financing works, and what happens when the town, just like any other agency, establishes a redevelopment project area to remove blight, which is what they're required and what they're limited to doing, is that all the properties that are designated within the project area are essentially fixed at a certain property tax rate. That property tax rate is, from that point on, distributed, wherever the property taxes were as of the date of establishing the district, distributed as they were before the project area was established, and everything that then comes in above that in terms of property tax revenues for that area. For example, if a blighted, empty lot is situated in a redevelopment project area, and because of the project funding, a new building is constructed, and that new building then yields additional property tax revenue to the town. All of that additional property tax revenue is considered increment. It's the increment above wherever that floor was set when the project area was established. That increment accrues over a period of years, so long as the project area exists, year after year after year, and that money can be used to pay for debt incurred in eliminating blight as required under the project area plan. In any given year, we may have a certain amount of money sitting in a fund that we've collected over time. That money has to be committed to paying debt, but we also know we're going to collect more over the lifetime of the project area, and that additional amount can be committed to paying the debt accrued through future projects that are taken on by the district, by the town. So it's very unique. It's unique to a project area. Once the project area expires as a matter of law, then that increment no longer accrues to the project area. And once it exists, once that increment exists, it can be used, but only for certain limited types of projects.
Thank you. Madam Manager.
Yes, I would just like to maybe wrap this up, unless there are more questions on RDA, with the point that not every city can form a redevelopment agency. The town was very fortunate, although through difficult circumstances, to be able to have formed an agency area. And I think why we continue to have our eye on 2011, and our goal is to position the council to have an important policy discussion about how you're going to use that last round of valuable resource for things that are important to the town that reside in the redevelopment agency area or are allowed under redevelopment agency law. So that's a very important point as we move forward.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any other questions, comments? All right. Again, Mr. Conway, excellent report, but what underlies this is this fiscal stability that under your oversight has allowed us to feel very comfortable as a council in our shepherding the resources of this community. I know that there are an awful lot of communities, although Mr. Wasserman chose not to reference those, there are an awful lot of communities that would very much love to be in the position we're in right now, and they're looking at massive debt and very difficult times ahead, and we're not in that position. And I think we owe a great debt of gratitude as a community to the staff and to actually all of the individuals within our organization who have worked to stabilize our financial situation. But I, along with the Vice Mayor, noticed that 2010-11 date coming up. Whether we can push that out, infinitely, that would be wonderful. But at the same time, it is there, and I think because of the fact that it's there waiting for us, we have to be very cautious. There are a couple of things that have been mentioned throughout the report. One is that we have a great deal of our revenue, the retail component of revenue, based on one particular company. And that company, every day I open up the business section, and if it's mentioned in the business section, I get this little twitch of the stomach, see where is it right now, and then when its competitors seem to fall off, then I feel much better. But it is an exciting time that we're in when we have so much of our stake in that particular company, and I think that it points out again that we need to diversify the sources of that revenue. And I know that we have talked as council, particularly at the last retreat, that this is something that's essential for us to engage in. So we're in a situation where we can feel very comfortable, at the same time we can't feel very safe. All right, moving on. I believe now we're going to have departmental and special fund comments. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, we're going to begin with the Police Department, which can be found on page D95 in your binders. And Chief Scott Seaman will present for his department.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure to present a generally status quo budget for the police department for 2007-2008. And the budget document that was referenced by the manager is really quite detailed. The narrative is extensive and will speak to many of the points that I would otherwise make, and so I'll keep my comments brief. I'm going to speak primarily around staffing and then some one-time purchases that are going to take advantage of or help us with important needs in the department. Our most significant issue in the police department continues to be patrol staffing, and so we're looking inward to address that and taking advantage of a position we have in an auto theft task force to return that officer to patrol. Actually has been back for 6 months now and helping us maintain our staffing levels in patrol. The downside of that is there's a $90,000 reimbursement that position has provided to the town, and so we're going to have to forego that reimbursement, and the town has replaced that money with funds to our budget to offset that lost revenue. And then we think that there may be minor service level impacts. We think that we can offset the loss of experience in that task force that we have touted previously through the assignment or temporary assignment of officers to the Detective Bureau for some occasional experience. In the area of kind of flexibility with hiring, we're looking to add $90,000 to the budget just to give us the ability on a short-term basis or as opportunities present themselves to hire ahead of vacancies, and that's something that we have had challenges with in the past. You know that it takes us probably 10 months or a year to hire someone and have them on the street, so we know that we can predict some of the openings. We'd like the ability to either through the use of overtime or perhaps a strategic hire be able to get ahead of those vacancies. Another area we're focusing on is the parking management program that continues to have costs that exceed our revenues. And what we're planning to do to reduce some of the costs, which we think can be done without negatively impacting the service levels, is to take advantage of 2 retirements that are happening and replace only one of those 2 positions. And so the effect would be we'd reduce the staffing from 3 parking control officers to 2. Those parking control officers do a lot of administrative work for the department. It's really kind of unseen. They do it a huge amount of vehicle maintenance and a lot of non-parking control related duties that are important to the department, and so that we can keep them focused on parking management or parking citations, we're proposing to add a community service officer intern position. That's a 20-hour part-time position, typically a college student, to help us with some of those administrative duties. In terms of one-time funds, we're proceeding with the purchase of the mobile video cameras for the police cars, and we're going to be replacing computers in the cars. We've had a generation of computers that have served us well, and we've put money aside prudently to be able to replace those, and we'll do those together this year. And finally, I've asked for $16,000 to be set aside for the study and possible purchase of cameras for the tasers that we implemented a year ago at this time. And we haven't decided whether or not to purchase those, but I wanted the money to be able to do it because I think it's a promising technology. We have 2 key projects that we're focused on in addition to many others that are on our work plan, but those are continuing to try to address the facility needs for the police department. We're in cramped quarters and are making good progress on exploring positive options. And the second is our continuing commitment to Los Gatos Prepared, so that in the event of a natural disaster, our residents are prepared to take care of themselves. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chief Seaman. I do have a quick question before I open it to the rest of the council. In the downtime, we reduced the number of officers who were on patrol. We reduced traffic officers. And now that we are at a point where, although we are maintaining our budget, you are finding ways to bring personnel back to the primary function of patrol. How close are we to where we want to be? I guess that really is the issue for me. Is are we at a point with this return of the officer from the special duty? How close are we to what you would feel is a level of comfort so that we can maintain the breadth of our patrol force and at the same time have enough capacity so the officers are not asked to do too much overtime
That is exactly the balance we're trying to strike. We're aware that we're not trying to pursue robust staffing and patrol, because you could genuinely add several more positions and put them to very good use in this community. We're trying to hire enough so that each of the patrol teams has at least the minimum number of people to go out on a night, and hopefully more, so that if someone either wanted the night off or was sick or was in training, that you wouldn't have to call someone back on overtime to meet a minimum staffing level. Again, that's not a hard floor below which we can't go, but in a way, when you get to a real low number, it is important and necessary for us to hire someone back. The short answer is it gets us to what we think is a very good workable number, but the council and the community needs to understand that we've made some other adjustments. The 2 traffic officers, the motorcycle officers we've taken off the street is part of that, and then we no longer have a school resource officer dedicated to the schools. That's a patrol officer who has collateral responsibility, and we'll actually be appointing another school resource officer in August, and it's going to be the first time we've hired someone with a clear expectation, or promoted someone to that position with a clear expectation that they're a beat patrol officer with a collateral assignment. So we're going to continue to feel our way through that model, and our stepping away from the one auto theft task force, I think, is appropriate to do at this time. It would have been a nice position to keep, but we recognize that it's a luxury we can't afford, and we'll get that experience another way.
Thank you, Chief. And also, just a comment about that I don't think you mentioned, and that's the extensive work you and the department have done with the youth of the community, and the outreach to the youth of the community, the response to the issues of youth, I think needs to be applauded and acknowledged. I wonder if you may comment to that.
Certainly. Thank you for that comment on the department's efforts. We actually work with the youth in the community in a number of ways. The most significant, I think, is our liaison with the Youth Commission, and we deal with 20 middle-aged and high school kids on important issues to youth, and we're just finishing our 3rd year with the Youth Commission, and I think this is, in fact, one of our strongest commissions this year, and a very issue-based commission. In addition, the department has been a leader in the Alive and Loving Life and the community outreach efforts dealing with youth and high-risk behavior. And I think we have set a standard for how government can work with its youth, because we do see ourselves as representing the entire town in those efforts, and have worked with other departments on many projects. And then finally, through the excellent work with schools, we've created a very strong partnership with youth, and we think that that pays off in a number of ways, both the relationship between police and youth, but also in terms of the information that we get back to help us solve crimes. And the final thing is we're on a path to know everyone in Los Gatos, and that includes the youth, and we recognize that not everybody is expected to know everyone, but through all of our people that we could know our community that well, and we think that working through neighborhoods and the business community, we're working toward that, and we see the youth as a significant part of that project.
Thank you very much, Chief. Council. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. And just 30 seconds to correct the chief for being modest, as he normally is. In addition to the Youth Commission and Alive and Loving Life, he also has police presence on Shift and Project Cornerstone. And not to be forgotten is the chief's personal modeling appearance with 125 Los Gatos High School students the other day as he walked down the runway and was at rehearsal supporting the youth there and allowing those 125 kids to get to know their chief of police.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad you opened the subject of youth, because I think we all share both the council and the chief's desire, as we've stated for a number of years now, to improve the relationship between our young people and our police department. And I think the credit clearly goes to Chief Seaman for making tremendous strides in that direction, and I think all the particulars are mentioned. That having been said, when I looked at the kind of the loss from the full-time school resource officer to the collateral assignment, I was a bit concerned about that, because I do think, and I have had the personal experience of seeing it work, because I'm on the Fisher campus every day, that officer gets to know the kids, and the kids get to know that officer and the other officers who are so assigned. And for all the reasons that the chief mentioned, that's beneficial to the young people, it's beneficial to the department as well. Sometimes they encounter a young person who they've met on campus and an issue has come up, and this is not some strange kid. Now it's somebody that they know. That being said, I would have, let me say, I would suggest that I would be comfortable in shifting some additional funding to increase. If we can't go back to the full-time SRO, and I would very much like to enable the chief to increase the time that the collateral time, if it must be, that the officers assigned to school resource work have to interact with the kids. And if that takes a few extra bucks, then I would be prepared to spend it. I have some other tabs on the police department, but I'll let the other council members go ahead. I just wanted to mention that while we were talking about youth.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. I agree with what Mayor Przinsky said in the sense that I remember last year when we were talking about police services and when the proposed budget came forward, and I believe at that time each department was required to reduce by 3 or 5%, and you'd done a yeoman's effort to figure out how to do that. And our feeling was that you cut a little bit too close to the bone, and so by the time we got the real budget to approve, some of that funding had come back. I also would like to encourage you and the manager and the finance director to really think about whether or not it is time to put a little bit more money back into staffing for police. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to say the same thing when we get to Parks and Public Works, because when I looked at the chart there, we're at the loss of positions over the last few years. The two largest departments, obviously they're the ones that took the two biggest hits, but they also are the ones that I think provide the services that are most expected and required by our community. Our first responsibility is to keep our residents safe, and the second responsibility is to keep the infrastructure going, and everything else is wonderful, but those are the two primary things that a municipality has to do. So I would not it would not be a priority to me that it be specifically tied to schools, but just making sure that those patrols are as staffed as they need to be to really take care of our community, our residents, our businesses, and the increasing number of visitors that we seem to have as the business community is picking up steam, and and just having sure we have enough folks out there on the street.
Thank you, Ms. McNutt. Other comments from council? Mr. Glickman?
Oh, thank you very much. I did, as I went through the report, note some things that I did want to take the opportunity to ask the chief about. So I noticed, for example, and I'm looking now at page D115 of the report, that one of the things that we do, and this is again youth-related, is that we have a diversion program. I know that's been going on for even, it predates you. I know that I believe it was Mr. Officer Bishop who ran it back when Mr. Todd was our chief. And then I noticed that, again, looking at page 116, that the percentage of young people who get into some trouble who are diverted has dropped in the last year. It went from, it looks like 44% down to 36%. And I was just wondering if you could, is that for lack of staffing, or is there some reason that number's gone down?
I'd have to look at what the specific number of cases are. We still have a fully staffed position there. What I would say is there have been a couple of very significant cases that have been investigated by that position, typically dealing with sexual assaults and molest cases. They're very time-consuming, and it may be a time budgeting issue that not every diversion case can be heard, and so the threshold at which a case may have had to be referred to juvenile probation might have been increased.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me make a comment on that, if I might. I spent 7 years on the county's Juvenile Justice Commission, and while I recognize the good and important work that the county Juvenile Probation Department does, I also recognize that they're geared to deal with different demographics, different communities, and the approach that might be appropriate with somebody who's into some very serious things might not be the optimal approach to work with the young people in our community. And that, it sounds when we say, well, somebody's on, say, informal probation, it's not a big deal. But then if somebody a young person in that situation does something that otherwise would be we would think fairly insignificant, like cutting class, they can end up in jail. So I've always been a strong proponent of the town's diversion system. We handle it locally under local control. And then if somebody's a real problem, we have the county system as a fallback. So again, I would say that if this is a matter of adding some resources, which would, I believe, tremendously benefit not only the youth, but their parents in our community, come back to us and say, this is what you need to do it, and I'd be strongly in favor of it. Let me just very briefly touch on...
If I could interrupt just for a second, Mr. Glickman. Madam Manager, you want to make a comment at this time?
I can hold till before we wrap up.
All right.
Police. Thank you, Mr.
Then Mr. Glickman, continue.
Thank you very much. Looking at page D128, notice that the amount of revenue that we are collecting from fines and forfeitures back in 03-04 was $540,000. It's kind of gone down to $380,000. And if that in fact is a reflection of needing more staffing, I'm assuming that's mostly parking enforcement, or maybe traffic enforcement in general. If we're losing almost $200,000, then that seems to me a fairly strong case for investing more, because it's not an investment and then there's nothing coming back in terms of dollars. So I would hope that we could take a look at bringing those numbers back up as appropriate. I'm not suggesting we just sort of go after everybody for the fun of it, but if we're not collecting revenues that we appropriately should be, then it would be worthwhile taking a look at why. In fact, if I look at page 130, I noticed that revenue received on parking citations, again, has gone down, and then it seems to, there's an indication that it's going to go up and then go down again. So in 03-04 it was 540, then it was 390, 97 for a couple of years. In 06-07 it was 423. This is $100,000. And then we're projecting 380 for the upcoming budget. So again, I wonder if it would be, in addition to being appropriate, it would be fiscally wise to shift some resources in that direction and kind of go back to the level of collection that I'm going to assume was appropriate in 03-04.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. Does that require a comment from the chief, or just?
I'd be happy to. There are two that I think Councilmember Glickman raised that are important to comment on. One, the first is juvenile diversions, and the juvenile justice system, you're right, does an excellent job dealing with a very complex dynamic with kids, and their purpose is really different than the adult justice system. It is really not to convict youth of crimes, it is to rehabilitate and to correct behavior, and our goals are consistent with that. I think it's important for the council and the community to understand, though, that the greatest number of juveniles do not go to juvenile hall, and it's because of crowding and overcrowding and the differential placement of kids of minority color in juvenile hall. And so very strict criteria have been created and are established as a countywide protocol for police departments. And it is typically more serious crimes or crimes that can be predicted to recur or where there isn't another alternative. And so in the greatest number of cases, we do deal with juveniles outside of the formal system. And that does not mean that they don't go on informal probation or stay at home on house arrest. In fact, there's a case currently in the news where just that circumstance is present. One youth is at home on house detention, and the other is in juvenile hall for a serious offense, but for different involvement of the juveniles. Our juvenile officer diverts a significant number of kids, does an excellent job, has kids do community service and prove that they've done it, and holds the parents accountable and signs off on that, and that manages and handles the case. And I don't think that we are sending very low-level kids to juvenile hall. I think we're managing that caseload, and I have no indication to think that that's out of whack. I do think the numbers are a little off because of the resource demands of the officer in that position, but it's something that we will take a look at, and I would like to understand why the numbers are different. Secondly, on parking, the program has been challenging because it's a manual system. People have to go out and manually mark the tires. We suffered a very serious injury with one of our parking control officers about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and another officer was off on disability leave for a long period of time, and so that can contribute to the lower production levels. We try to manage the workload so that we're paying attention to the violations and not trying to drive for a certain target of revenues, and we recognize that there are offsets between the revenues and our expenses, but we think that with the hiring back of a new parking control officer who would replace one of the two, that we think our actual attention to parking will increase. Our focus will be greater because we'll have a community service officer intern doing some of the administrative work. And at the time when the numbers were higher, we actually had two very effective park control officers, but because of the layoff policies of the town and the seniority rights, those were the two that left town service. And the ones who remained worked at a different level, and so I think it did affect our income through fines and forfeitures. And so by remaining focused on it, we think that we can appropriately enforce parking revenues, parking citations, and we think that revenues may adjust slightly.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, and I wasn't going to say, but I need to say very quickly, as far as on the question of fines and forfeitures and salaries and benefits, and then you look over at the town staff for parking control officers and FTEs, what I see is, as we look back to 0304 and compare to 0708, is that our FTEs went down 35-40% from 5.7 down to 3.7. Our fines and forfeitures dropped 200,000, and our cost, our salaries and benefits, dropped 200,000. So everything just slid proportionally and in ratio. We're receiving less fines and forfeitures because we have less patrol officers out there, but when we had twice as many parking control officers out there getting 200,000 more in income, it costs us 200,000 more in expenses. So the net effect was zero to the town.
There is a relationship between the expense of a parking control officer and the return that officer generates in terms of enforcement and parking citations. This is a program that in 2000 and 2001, I think was projected to be 10 park control officers, actually got increased to 6, and there was a different economic time, and so the economy has changed, our staffing levels have changed. It's really, really challenging to try and anticipate what the levels are. There have also been a couple times where we have reduced the level of enforcement because of projects that are operating downtown, and we don't want to disrupt the business community and the viability of those businesses. So we're always searching for that static period. We haven't yet found it. We hope that with this new modification that we'll have an opportunity to get that kind of static predictability.
Okay, and I would just like to make comment that maybe people are just being good. You know, maybe they're just not parking quite as long as they did once upon a time. I don't think we can always say that there's supposed to be a consistent number in those issues that present themselves when we're looking at a revenue stream based on some parking enforcement. That it is circumstantial in great measure, and I think that the issue for me would be how we use that parking resource, because initially it wasn't really intended to be a revenue generator. It was intended to provide an opportunity for people to park in our downtown and use the services of the downtown. I would just caution anyone to, in making the assumption, therefore, that there needs to be a constant revenue stream based on factors that aren't necessarily validated by the reality. The manager would like to make some comment.
Actually, this is a great discussion, and I think it's indicative of really the results of what we've been through over the last 5 years. We've had to take services down. It's been relatively seamless because of how we've navigated through these waters, but all these different comments really have touched on a level of service question. So as you go through this evening and express some desires, one thing I would ask that you think about is the level of service that the town is now receiving sufficient to allow us to continue to keep our eye on it and perhaps talk about this again in the fall when we come to you with your first quarter report. And perhaps if revenues are looking better than we're now seeing them, you might give us some direction to pursue X or Y in the development of next year's budget. If there's something really intolerable right now, then we should receive that direction. I feel that we've always had an open door to come back to you. You said it very clearly last year if the chief felt that the community would be in jeopardy because of taking down the force that you wanted to know about it. Because you have an excellent manager here sitting to my left, he tried to alter shifts and do other things to try to find a balance in service delivery to the community within the money that you have. He just wrote me a note, and Scott, maybe you can comment on that. You have started to talk to the schools to see if they'd be willing to fund any portion of an SRO, and would you like to comment on that without committing the schools at this time? But
Certainly. I've just had preliminary discussions with superintendents of both the elementary and the high school district about shared expenses for school resource officer, recognizing that there's a benefit to both of us to be in the school on a full-time basis. And police officer salaries and benefits is a large number, and recognize that it takes some time to plan for that, so we're really looking ahead a year. And what we discussed is let's try this arrangement, particularly with a new officer who didn't get morphed into this position but selected it and decided to be a patrol officer and a school resource officer. Try it for a year and see if it works, and then perhaps approach each of our budgets next year with an opportunity to share costs and at least do half-time or maybe a little bit better.
And this will be the last comment before I move on to Parks and Public Works. But I think that what you've demonstrated, Chief, is you've looked at a situation, you've looked at an issue that is beyond your control, that is the fiscal issue, and worked creatively to resolve that. And that includes the 12-hour shift. It also includes the hybrid assignment to the school services, and continuing to allow officers who are already motorcycle trained to come on and use motorcycle as while they're on patrol to supplement the motor officers who were so assigned. I think the creativity is a significant thing. We can always go back to the things we've been used to doing in the past. It doesn't necessarily mean that those were better, nor does it mean that we're actually going to get better service. It just means that we're used to it. And so the fact that you've taken the department in a more creative direction, I applaud. And I also am very much going to reinforce again the whole focus on disaster and emergency preparedness, and bringing our neighborhoods together to be able to self-sustain for 72 hours, since we know that's really where we need to be in a case of a major emergency, because of the fact that that's just the nature of the game. But again, I applaud you for the creative approach you've taken, and look forward to the continuing updates to us about how your unit feels it's being able to deliver that service.
Thank you. I'd like to just close by thanking Nancy Dawn and Captain Dave Gravel for their assistance in bringing this together. They really did the heavy lifting.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Glickman?
I apologize for, because the mayor said he wanted this to be the last comment. I just wanted to go on record as saying that I agree with the comment made by Councilman McNutt, that now the times are not as tight as they were. I would be very comfortable when the manager comes back with a full revise to look at some more flexibility in funding the police department.
Thank you. Let's move on then to Parks and Public Works and Kevin Rohani.
yes, and Parks and Public Works can be found on page D133.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure to present to you the operation budget for the Parks and Public Works Department. For fiscal year 07-08, department will continue to look for creative opportunities to best utilize the resources that we have in providing the most effective and efficient service to the community. I will briefly go over some of the highlights of the adjustments to our status quo budget per program. In the engineering program, we will be undertaking revision to the grading ordinance. Our grading ordinance has been outdated, has been written a number of years ago, and with the development of the hillside grading and design standards, they are not in tune with each other, and that grading ordinance needs to be revised to bring it up to par with the hillside standards, our 3 ordinances. So these are the documents that we use, both Parks and Public Works and Community Development, on a daily basis in our project development areas. So that would be a major accomplishment that we plan to undertake. On the staffing front, the proposal is to reclassify a senior engineering technician position to an engineering assistant position. The current engineering technician is retiring in June next month. She's been with the town for over 20 years, and as this position has developed over the years and times have changed, we feel it's time to bring it to a much more higher level of professional expertise, especially in light of the complexity of the private development projects that the town undertakes. We are also proposing to increase our current temporary engineering technician hours from 20 to 30 hours per week. This individual provides supports for a wide range of our CIP projects, our asset management programs, our GIS mapping, and whole range of services both for the PPW and all other departments in the town that we interact on a daily and weekly basis. We also propose to continue the funding for a temporary engineering intern position. This individual is helping the private development engineering group in conjunction with the community development in processing projects on the private development arena. In our administration program, we are a part-time temporary office specialist that was funded as a one-time in the current fiscal year 06-07. We plan to defund that and eliminate that position. Those tasks are going to be reassigned internally to the staff and also be incorporated as a part of our asset management program. In the streets program, we are continuing to pursue 2 elements that have been highlighted of high interest to the community. In the downtown area, our sidewalk steam cleaning. In the past, we have had a part-time staff as a part of the town staff, temporary staff, do about 10 to 15 hours per week, spot cleaning, pressure washing of the sidewalks. This has not caught up with as the business has picked up and the crowds and the traffic on the sidewalks. We have not been able to keep up with the level that the community would have liked. In this budget, we are proposing to include funding for up to 5 to 6 times a year that we would have a contractor come and pressure wash all of our downtown sidewalks on Santa Cruz Avenue and Main Street. In fact, as a part of the current year budget, we will be doing a cleanup over the next few weeks with a contractor. This would, have a more continuous cleanup of the sidewalks, and we would do spot cleaning with our own part-time staff. One of the other elements in the downtown was the trash pickup of the courtesy cans. In the past, there hasn't been really clear definition of who does those cleanings. With our current WVCNR garbage contract that we have, they do pickup of those courtesy cans Saturday mornings. We are working, we are proposing a budget to bring up a temporary maintenance worker to come on Saturday afternoons and Sunday morning and Sunday afternoons, basically 3 times on a weekend, to come and clean the courtesy cans, clean around them, put new liners in there, so we don't get caught with the situation of these cans overflowing in the middle of the summer. And even we have started that program on a trial basis, and we feel that this is a approach that would really enhance the beauty of our downtown area. Under the parks programs, we have looked at our temporary maintenance hours, and
upon detailed review, we've reduced some of those hours. The focus has been to have the temporary maintenance hours for the weekends, and they would be helping the full-time staff on weekends for opening and closing of the parks, general cleaning of the parks, bathrooms, helping with the county weekend work crew. So that we have brought that the hours into aligned with the actual work that is going to be needed. In conjunction with the street program, both parks and streets, we have undertaken doing a number of collaborative and joint projects. This is to basically, again, utilizing our resources we have to the best possible, getting the maximum value of our own internal sources. We've done a few projects as of late on Los Gatos Boulevard a few weeks ago. We did a median cleanup and rehabilitation that if you've seen, we planted new shrubs and trees and went out and did a major cleaning. We have done a concrete repair and replacement. This was a joint effort between both divisions plus outside contractors. So we continue to look for opportunities to utilize our resources the best we can. Under our equipment replacement program for the fiscal year 07-08, as we have looked all of our operation and in conjunction with the police department, we will be replacing 3 of the police patrol cars, 2 police investigation cars, 1 police admin cars, and 3 pickup trucks for the Parks and Public Works as a part of the 07-08 budget. And last, under our facilities program, we have looked at our operation and how we do maintain and upkeep of the various town buildings and facilities we have. And in recognition of the growing maintenance responsibilities that we have, we're proposing to reclassify a maintenance worker, which one of our current maintenance workers, whom all he does is basically take care of the town facilities, reclassify that to a facility coordinator position. And this would bring in better alignment the type of work and the level of services that he does to a proper classification for the position. This briefly concludes my comments. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rahani. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you, and thank you. First of all, a compliment. In reading your report, it's clear to me the efforts that are being made in Parks and Public Works to analyze what you're doing and to make it more effective. So you deserve a commendation for that. Also, since the grading in the hillsides and the land use issues that have become before us have been a concern to all of us, I want to commend you for working on a grading ordinance. You may have said it in here, and it just escaped me. What is the time frame, and is this something that you'll personally be working on? How is it going to be staffed?
We will be working. We have a consultant on board that will be helping us, both our department and the community development as we work on the project. So I will be involved in it. My staff will be involved in it. Staff from the community development will be involved in it. Our timeline is probably we will start on that toward the latter part of the summer, just as some of the summer workloads tapers off. We can dive into it and have this as it goes through process, because we will be preparing drafts, working internally, going through the planning commission and public hearing. So my anticipation is by spring of next year, late spring, early summer, we would have the new grading ordinance ready for council consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. As I previewed earlier, I am concerned to make sure that you have the proper staffing. I thought there was one bullet point on page D 143 that I just find startling, because we go around town all the time and we tend to think it's a small town, and we actually forget how much is actually here to take care of. So when you say maintain 62 public sites, including 12 parks, the Los Gatos Creek Trail, 3 open space areas, 15 acres of landscaping for median, islands, and parking lots, ground maintenance for 5 town-owned buildings, I appreciate wanting to reclassify a maintenance facility position to be the correct classification, but it's still only one set of hands. So, again, if you feel that an extra pair of hands would be helpful. It certainly is a much lower salary point than a sworn officer, and it would be something that I would be interested in. And also, I think it's going to come up when we get into the CIP budget, because there are some things that I'm going to be asking, can we be a little bit more aggressive on? And I know that every time we do anything like that, that involves huge amounts of staff time in your department. So if I see some wiggle room in the budget, and so that would be an okay thing for me to have staff to pursue.
Thank you, Ms. McNutt. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And when I reviewed the operating budget, I had two departments. It was Police and Parks and Public Works that I had questions to ask of you, and may not have a whole lot more to say tonight because the reports are all so excellent. The question I have for you, Mr. Rouhani, I'm looking on page D134, and I look in there, and the first thing I was looking at where the changes were, and I saw salaries and benefits increased by almost 14%, which is a large number. Yet I go through each of the FTEs, non-general, general, building, vehicle, everywhere, and you're using fewer employees than you did 4 years ago. You're using 27 instead of 31, 1 instead of 2, 0 instead of 5 under sanitary sewer, vehicle maintenance supervisors, building maintenance supervisors. You're maintaining this town with fewer people than you did 4 years ago. So I'm having a tough time, and I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but I just plain old missed it, seeing how salaries went up $400,000 from the last year when you've been reducing positions, which I think you've done a tremendous job doing in maintaining the services and the quality of our town. I just don't know how you're doing it.
Steve can jump in here if needed, but I think there's a few things going on that you see reflected in the numbers is cost of benefits, the cost of some reclassifications where we've been using certain labor classifications that we really needed to reclassify to higher level salary. I think that that's in part what you see happening with the shift from engineering tech to engineer, which is more professional level. So there's some cost increases associated with classifications, with benefits, as well as the cost of salaries that have gone up.
And I have one more item to add to that, which is fairly significant. There were a number of maintenance workers that were funded in the sewer maintenance fund, so their numbers in their salary and benefits were absorbed in that fund. When we kept them and kept them with other general fund money, they didn't change the head count in this department, but they are now part of the general fund expenditures. So you're seeing they lost their funding source, but we absorbed them. So the head count stayed the same, but the cost went up significantly when we lost the sewer.
So that's why on paper, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So that's why on paper we have fewer people in PP&W than we have in the last 5 years, yet we have the most cost.
Correct. We lost
because
the
we're
sewer.
allocating all of the cost to this department as compared to you were subsidizing part of the cost with the sewer funding before.
That was one big factor, yes.
Thank you very much. That answers my question.
Mr. Glickman.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I think we're very pleased and proud of in the town, as we are with all the good work that you do, is the good conditions of our streets. And I know that we measure that by a figure called the Pavement Condition Index. And just a general question, in this budget, is there sufficient funding to maintain the PCI at the previous level?
Yes, Councilmember Glickman. Actually, we will discuss that when we come to the capital budget. But yes, it's our intent in this current, well, in the fiscal year 7-8, we will have a sufficient amount to keep our PCI, the Pavement Condition Index, at the same level in the mid-70s, which is very good for Los Gatos. We have approximately a little bit over 100 miles of road over the past 5 years. We have done various treatment to the surface and base of about over half of those roads. We still have about 50 miles of roads that need to be resurfaced and receive various treatments. So that's a continuous effort and challenge that we face to utilize the funding that we have with the best and distributed over across many roads and still keeping our PCI at an acceptable level.
Thank you. And if I could ask one more, and again, this may come up under capital, but there was discussion on council of aligning with what many other agencies are doing, cities and towns, which is looking to the private property owner to absorb some of the cost of either sidewalks or curb repair. Can you just remind us of where we stand on that policy?
Yes, that discussion was had about a year and a half, 2 years ago, if I recall, about as many cities and agencies are moving away from the agency picking up the cost of repairs to the curb gutter and sidewalk. Some have gone completely to the position that it would be responsible to the property owner. Some have gone to a 50-50 program where the agency pays 50%, the property owner pays 50%. At that time where a report was presented to the council, it was my recollection that the direction was given that at that time the council didn't want to pursue that program. If that's the wishes, we can certainly pursue that further. But currently, we are looking at, and what we've been doing over the past few months, again, in a creative way, using our own internal forces plus the contractors to still repair and replace damaged and broken up curbs and sidewalks in a cost-effective way.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to reopen that can of worms, but it would be useful, since we're talking about the budget, to get some estimate of what the fiscal impact that would be in terms of the town spending a little less money if we were to go in that direction. Because then again, we can look at it in terms of 2007 and 2008 dollars on what the impact would be to the town versus the impact on the property owner who wouldn't like it. So it would be useful to know that.
And Madam Manager.
Yes, and just to augment what Mr. Rouhani said, he's correct. We did bring a policy idea to the council, and you didn't close the door completely, but you weren't comfortable proceeding without a more thorough vetting publicly of the idea. And quite frankly, we just haven't had time to go to the public and do our due diligence and hold the public hearings that I know you would want. So I appreciate keeping the door open. I would say probably a similar question would need to be out there around tree trimming, because as has been referenced, we don't have too many hands out there these days, and you don't trim trees through the internet. So, whether it's adding more staff or perhaps contract dollars, that's maybe another area for either more funding or sharing with the public.
I want to make a quick comment, Mr. Rouhani. First of all, in parallel to something I said to the chief, I've observed a couple of the projects wherein you've taken the bulk of staff and have worked jointly within that staff to hit a target area and to clean it up, area that needed to be cleaned up. I'm referring to the boulevards, medians. And just noticing them over this last weekend, where in a very short time you're able to take that entire median strip from Lark, I guess, down to the boulevard, to Blossom Hill almost, and actually work that through. I appreciate the creative effort, because I think we can get stagnant in some of the expectations we have that we're working kind of an aligned staff operation, and the people of this community just want service. That's what they're looking for. They want product, they want service. The intent is that we're going to deliver it. And that's what this council is about, is to make sure that the services the people are asking for, the services they get. And in a time where I agree with Ms. McNutt, your staffing levels are down, to be able to maximize the staff that you've got to do certain things that are really essential, I applaud. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Thank you, Mr. Rouhani. The next will be our librarian, Ms. Conaway.
And the library can be found on page D239.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and public. I'm happy to present the library portion. The budget, the library, as with the other departments, will be maintaining a status quo budget, essentially 54 hours a week over 7 days. Our collection monies are staying at approximately $185,000 per year. And we continue to investigate and study how that money can best be expended as far as online resources as well as print resources and also other media. And that's a constantly moving target. And we continue to provide 24/7 service to the community through our website. And so databases can be accessed, information about our programs can be accessed. People can go in and search our catalog. They can place a reserve on their book and all of those kinds of things they can do at 3 a.m. if they desire to do that. And we will continue with what I think is an outstanding series of children's and adult programs. With the help of the Friends of Los Gatos Library, we have anywhere between 10 and 12,000 attendees at our children's programs, including young adult programs. And we just have very positive feedback on that series of programs, and are know that the community appreciates those efforts. We had budgeted for a new server last year to support our integrated online system, which is our acquisitions, check-in, check-out, periodicals, circulation. It's the whole shebang, kind of the big computer system with which we run the library. But that server just hung in there, so we didn't replace it, but we will be this year, we're pretty sure. The changes are nothing too major, with the exception of our self-check system. We can continue to promote the idea of self-service because the circulation in the library does continue to increase. And in order to handle that, and thinking toward a new library, if we should have one in the future, usual studies say that circulation and attendance increase by about 50% with a new library. And that's a challenge, and so we really look to technology. I mean, we certainly won't be increasing staffing by 50%, I know that. So we need to look at self-service and how we can provide the technology where people really can help themselves. And our problem right now is that the current system that we have is failing. It's very frustrating for us and for our customers. It works, sometimes it doesn't, and it's continually having to be rebooted, and it's at end of life as far as the vendor is concerned. They're not interested in it anymore. It's a number of years old. So we're looking at what the possibilities would be for managing circulation now and in the future, and as we assume that it will continue to rise in numbers. And there are a number of options which we have looked at very carefully, and have looked at what other libraries are doing, and have looked at the literature as far as best practices for managing circulation in public libraries. And there are several. There aren't a lot of viable choices. There's the magnetic tape technology, which is an old technology, and which provides security, but doesn't do too much else. And the way that libraries are going now is to RFID, radio frequency identification. And that is the best candidate for the future, and for the future of the library. It's really technology that is replacing barcodes and magnetic tapes. And I don't know of any newer library that is going with the old technologies. It's very much in the direction of RFID for many reasons, which I won't go into tonight. But one of the goals with RFID, or whatever we choose, would be greater numbers of people who are able to easily and quickly and efficiently check out their own materials, because that has a large impact on our workforce. and we want it, we would like our collections to be secure, obviously, because if there is not a system in place, again, practices have shown that things can very quickly start to disappear. And also, we would like to be able to run an inventory. Sometimes we really need to be able to do that. It's very difficult now with 130,000 items. We're basically having staff go into the stacks with pencil and paper and see what might be missing. So all of these reasons go toward a new circulation management system, and that's really the principal thing that's on my mind this evening. But beyond that, we also like to, of course, we're very happy that the master plan is coming to conclusion, we hope, and we'll be watching that. We're also watching Senate Bill 156, and I just saw last week that it got out of the suspense file and went to the Senate Appropriations Committee, and that's still a long, long way from, of course, having any money available, but that's something that we keep our eye on. So that concludes my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Conaway. Questions from council? Mr. Glickman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you for the excellent library that you run. As far as a new library or not, who knows? I mean, I think that's something that really is up to what the folks in town want to do. We surveyed them recently, and the level of support did not, as we understand it, come up to the level where we can say, okay, the town's behind it, we can do this. So it might be appropriate at this point to hope for that in the future, but say, you know, what can we do, you know, given the reality of the present? And let me just be a little bit anecdotal. I love to use the library, but I find myself in Borders a lot more. Not because their selection is so much better, but because some of the amenities and ambiance are available. And it's my understanding that some libraries are looking at the things that make large bookstores like that attractive. And one of the things is that they have a little coffee shop, and they have you can get a coffee or a chai or something cold to drink, and maybe even something to nibble on. And that makes a big, big difference. In the existing facility, is there any feasibility or possibility of looking at perhaps providing something like that?
Well, as you probably know, we're a little stretched for room. You will be happy to know, though, that we, some time ago, a year or two ago, did away with the thing that said you can't bring food in the library. And because when we thought about it, we thought, well, when people check out materials and take them home, what do they do with them? Well, they sit at the kitchen table and eat and read their books. So, and actually, we have not experienced any rise in books, dipped in the soup or anything like that. It's so that's a step in that direction. It would be possible, I suppose, to have a kiosk or something like that. We haven't done it just because of the space pressures that we're under. We do serve refreshments with a lot of our programs, but it's an idea worth. I mean, it's certainly. I don't think there's any new library that's being built without quite a nice place to get coffee and snacks and that kind of thing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. McNutt?
Thank you. The self-check system that I think it's $115,000 that you have set aside, will that be fully transportable when we build a new library in 2 or 3 years?
Absolutely, and that's...
I have a positive. My glass is half full. We're going to make it happen.
Okay. Yes, it would be, you could come here 10 years from now and go into the new library, and it would be the same system if we go the direction that I think we should go. I don't think I'm supposed to say this too much tonight, but we have studied it. Okay. We've studied it thoroughly, and there's no question in my mind that it would be not a good investment, I don't think, to go back to old magnetic tapes and that kind of thing. So yes, it would be completely portable.
Thank you.
Other comments? Thank you, Ms. Conway, for an excellent job and an excellent report. The next presentation is Community Services. Ms. Faulkner.
And community services can be found on D-195.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Council. The proposed Community Services Department budget, like that of the other departments, is a status quo budget. We're happy to report that this budget will allow us to continue to provide valuable services to the community, including services such as our volunteer program, our senior services, affordable housing, and our environmental programs, including solid waste management. This evening, I would like to highlight budget changes, 3 budget changes, specifically in the areas of solid waste management, personnel, and community grants. With regard to the solid waste fund, we talked previously about franchise fees that come into the town. The franchise fees under the new contract with West Valley Collection and Recycling go from 10% to 16%. That means additional revenues of about $400,000. We have actually closer to $5,000. We have increased the franchise fees, and the flip side of that is there are about $330,000 in other kinds of surcharges that we no longer receive. So the net of this change is that there are an additional $220,000 that go to the town's general fund. So that's really good news, I think. With regard to personnel, we propose to take 3 positions, actually, hourly positions, and replace those with a single full-time employee. The change will result in several benefits, including improved service to the neighborhood center customers, because there will now be a person who's there during our open hours to assist them. We'll also have consistent support for the staff. We have a number of part-time people in the department. Getting people together for something as simple as a staff meeting is sometimes difficult. That's just an example of how nice it will be to have someone there that's full-time that can actually work and provide staff support. One of the positions that we will be eliminating is the recycling coordinator. So a number of the higher-end projects that are done by that position would be moving to other staff in the department. There's a trade-off, and the more support kinds of duties would be given to that Secretary 1. So that's a trade-off that I think will make us more efficient and also serve the public better. Lastly, in the community grant program, there was a one-time augmentation of $2,500 provided to A Place for Teens in the current fiscal year. That will not be provided, but there will be a $1,600 increase to the Place for Teens grant, as discussed earlier this year, so that the total funding available to them through the grant program will be $12,000. The art docents had received this year a $500 grant augmentation, and that's been included in the budget this year, so their grant will be $4,500. The CDBG funds for human service agencies dipped slightly as a result of council direction at the same earlier public hearing. That has been replaced with general fund dollars, so we'll be able to keep those human service grants whole. Finally, there's a whole $130,000 that's going to the Photo Guild, and that allows us to give them a $1,000 grant and keep with what we propose to be a minimum granting amount. We have a number of key projects this year. Those are all identified in the budget. One that I know, there's a couple that I know will continue to take a fair amount of energy. That is in the area of solid waste management, specifically environmental protection and the programs that go along with that. I'd also like to highlight Community Unity that has continued to grow, and it's a way that we can serve the community. With that, I'll conclude my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Wasserman first.
Thank you. Just for the record, and perhaps I misheard you, when you were talking about the Photographic Guild of Los Gatos, I think I heard $130,000, and I believe you meant $130.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
I would believe there are a lot of photographers out there who are quite pleased when they heard that news, yeah. Okay. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I know I was going to get my camera. First of all, I want to commend you for the program on the recycling away from home. You talk about that on page D227. Thanks a lot. I think that's great. It was not clear to me from the report what exactly, as I read it, there are changes you anticipate in Music in the Park, but I don't understand what changes you anticipate happening in terms of revenue or anticipated revenue or expenditures, anticipated expenditures. Could you explain that to me?
The Arts Commission continues to bring in revenues to cover our hard costs, to cover the costs of the performers, the sound, and other related costs. They have continued to bring in more money over the years, and we're anticipating about $41,000 in revenues for this next fiscal year. And that is a result of the expenses going up. At some point, one of the things that we talk about in the report is one of the challenges to stabilize the costs so that we don't have to go chasing as many dollars.
Please.
So when you're talking about the expenses, you're talking about the cost of the performers going up because of the performers being selected. And does that also include expenses attributable to services performed by the town, or does it not include those?
It does not include the services provided by the town.
Okay, so that would be an additional expenditure?
Correct.
All right. And do you reflect that expenditure in your report here, the town part of it?
Yeah, in the Arts and Cultural Services program, that's where we cover the costs of Music in the Park, under 80. I'll find a page number.
Well, I think, is it D220?
It's Arts and Culture, yes, correct.
And looking at that chart, I see the 41,000, and I think that's where you were talking about the monies raised, funding raised for the performers.
Correct.
And then under the expenditures, the salaries and benefits, is that the town staff?
Correct.
And then the operating expenditures of 43,800, that is for what?
That's the cost for the bands, et cetera, and that's offset largely by the 41,000 raised by the commission.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you.
If I may add, there is some small expense for PPW services that are also paid for from these $41,000.
Mr. Glickman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, looking at page D203, we have a very wonderful senior program, and during the retreat, I remind the manager that we had asked to look at somewhat more detailed analysis of that and the youth-oriented programs, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention that there is, at least on my part, some considerable interest in that. In looking at page D212, we're looking at the housing program. We've got, or expect to have in the 2007 and 8 fiscal, 42 owner-occupied below market rate and 90 rental. That's correct. Per capita, could you give us a sense of how that compares to other communities? And if you can't do it right now, you can get back to us on it. I just wanted to get a sense of whether we're in the middle, we're lagging behind, if we're out there setting an example. How do we look on that?
It's we have compared ourselves to other cities' programs with regard to process. We have not looked recently into the numbers that they produce. That said, one of the major differences between our program and the programs that some of the other municipalities have is that they do not all have the same types of deed restrictions that require the units to be affordable in perpetuity. So there might be some that are less built out than Los Gatos, where there is more housing construction going on, where they may have more units. That does not necessarily mean that they will have more in the long term.
Okay. If I can use the phrase bottom line, but my bottom line is that, I do want us to provide an appropriate amount of affordable housing. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, but if you're saying that perhaps our strong focus or I don't use the word insistence, but requirement for deed restrictions, if that is in fact dissuading property owners from going in that direction to the detriment of providing affordable housing, by all means let the council know that so that we can consider whether we need to reconsider the policy. I also noticed on page 237 the third bullet under key program services that you say you want to work with Housing Program and Community Development Department to increase the amount of affordable housing in town with use of CDBG funds. Is there a target number for that?
Not at this point.
Okay. That would be of interest, I think, if we could get that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Manager?
Yes, we could certainly answer that question. I would like to just remind us all that we do have 20% funds that are accruing, so we will need to be as aggressive as we possibly can given the cost of land in town. And I believe there's a housing element update coming down the pipeline, which will also be another opportunity to focus on this very important topic.
And that was going to be my comment, is that we know we have a new housing element with markers for us to achieve in this next round. Ms. McNutt.
Is this the time to talk about United Way? Does this fall under?
It would be a good time.
Okay. Yes. Do you know if their request of every city was the same amount, or did they prorate it based on population? Or did they ask every one of the 15 cities for 5,000?
No, I believe it's prorated.
But not necessarily on population. They broke it down into various city sizes and not exactly on population.
Like in tiers or something like that.
Correct.
Well, my feeling, if we're supposed to weigh in on this evening, is that at least for this first year, I would be willing to do the 5,000 as requested to be a good partner with the other 14 cities and towns in the county and get this thing launched. And I did notice that in their letter, they did say that they would be doing data collection and reporting back so that at the end of the year, we could see how much our residents are actually benefiting from that, and then maybe future funding we might want to cut back or expand depending on how useful it is to our folks. But I think, to be fair, that we should step up and be a partner with everyone else.
If I can make comment to that, I do want to hear the rest of the council's opinion on that. My understanding, and we have had this discussion at the Cities Association as well, that they are not exactly completely developed in their program. That they are, and then the rest of the cities have not bought into the program. It's not like we're lagging behind. I think that there is some question about the depth of the development of this particular the 211 operation. Could you comment to that, Madam Manager?
Yes, we've reported out as a City Managers Association. I know Regina's done a lot of research in calling around the cities, and the Assistant City Managers group have all checked in with each other as to what they're doing. And I think in some ways it's, each city is just making their own decision based on either the data that they feel they need, or if they want to be a good partner at the front end and give it a go. So I think what we're hearing is kind of case by case. I know that the county and City of San Jose are up at the $150,000 level, and we're just very clear early on that they wanted to do that. So what we've brought you is just kind of a split it in half recommendation, but if it's council consensus to bring back the full amount in the resolution on a one-time basis and then see where it goes, we'll take that direction, so.
All right, then let's hear from council on that. Mr. Glickman.
Yeah, I'm going to share the mayor's concern. This is a new program. Many things sound like wonderful ideas, and some of them prove out and some of them don't. And I would be more inclined to take a good deal more of a wait-and-see attitude on this, and I do think that the staff's recommendation puts us where I would like to be, which is we're not saying no, but we're not hopping on board entirely. We're making I would recommend we make the contribution to the $2,500 level. I mean, we're not talking about a ton of money, but we need to be prudent with everything. And my inclination would be to follow the staff's recommendation. And perhaps a year or so from now, if it's a wildly successful program, we'll be more comfortable being more generous with it. And on the other hand, if it just turns out to be one of those wonderful ideas that wasn't, then we'll have looked fairly wise. So I would go with the staff recommendation.
Mr. Glickman, thank you. Vice Mayor Spector or Mr. Wasserman, any comments to that? All right, well, that's a pretty significant statement we're making here. My inclination is to go with the staff recommendation as well. I think from the point of view of the rest of the cities and towns of the county, they felt somewhat, I hate to be putting words in other mayors and council members' mouths, but felt somewhat blindsided by the full buy-in of San Jose and the county, and made the rest kind of irrelevant in terms of their due diligence. But I think it's certainly not going to make or break the operation. I will second the staff's recommendation on the half in, half out until we see what more is developed through the 211 system. And I would like to hear if we could either get just a sense where the other two members of council are so that we can draw this to close. Mr. Wasserman.
With the knowledge and information you've presented from your meetings and with the staff's recommendation, I'll go with the 2,500 at this time, too.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Spector.
Agree with you, Mike, Mr. Glickman, and staff.
Okay. Okay. So you hear our direction on that? All right. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Faulkner? Then thank you very much for, again, a wonderful presentation. Great job done. I just also want to commend your Community Services Commission. When we met with them on retreat, the comments made about their surveying of our various senior centers to determine how well prepared they are for significant emergencies and disasters, and then moving into the actual the smaller centers and trying to get to our seniors who may even be individuals with the information that we might have to both establish where the needs are in a major emergency and also how they can survive themselves is highly to be commended. Thank you so much. Next we have community development and RDA. Mr. Lortz.
And community development can be found on D65.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to present the proposed Community Development Department and Redevelopment Agency operating budgets. As council is aware, the Community Development Department is operating on a cost recovery basis, thereby virtually eliminating our reliance on the general fund. As previously discussed, the Redevelopment Agency also has its own funding source, which is derived from the annual increase in property taxes for those properties that are located within the redevelopment project area. There are many important projects that we are working on or will undertake next fiscal year, but two items are included in the proposed budget that are worthy of mention. First is the replacement of an associate planner position with a senior planner position. This change increases the department's salary base but does not increase the number of FTEs or employees. This change is recommended in recognition of the complex high-level projects that are part of the department workload. The second noteworthy item is the inclusion of funding for the possible outsourcing of public noticing. Staff will evaluate this concept in detail and report back to council to obtain input and direction. Both items can be funded with the projected department revenues. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lortz. Ms. McNutt.
I love your report. Thank you. Very quick question. This is just to harass you about online permitting that is in the budget again, as it was last year and the year before and the year before that. So is it really going to happen this year?
Oh, it is going to happen, and probably in the next 60 days.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we
I'll
are
be there
we are
this summer.
virtually online with that.
Okay.
We've gone through a lot of work. There was a lot of detail work that had to be worked out on the technology end of it, but we are almost there.
Okay.
I believe you. Vice Mayor Spector.
Also, thank you for that brief report. On D66 of your report, I understand that I understand that it's cost recovery, so your revenues and expenditures are pretty much lining up there. But on the expenditures, operating expenditures, we had 941,000 adopted. Looks like it's going to be 778, but then a request for 1.2 million. What is causing that jump there?
Oh, it'd be pass-throughs, items that are paid for by developers and passed directly to a contractor. So that would be like a geotechnical report, an arborist report, those kinds of things.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Other questions from council? You're our model, Mr. Lortz. Thank you very much, and it may have something to do with the time of the evening as well. But again, very thoroughgoing, excellent, obviously excellent operation, very complex operation, and we appreciate all that you've done. We appreciate also the work that's being done with the Planning Commission right now to increase their effectiveness, particularly given they're now being broadcast live on KCAT, and the opportunity for the community to then observe another functioning of government thereby. And there's been an awful lot of work done by staff and out of your office to make sure that they are as effective as they can be in front of the television cameras. And with that, we commend you. Thank you. All right. And that brings us then to Legal and Administrative Services. Ms. Hariyama.
As Jenny's coming up, Jenny's actually going to cover legal, administrative services, human resources, and finance. And then if there's any questions she can't answer, those directors will respond. And I'll let her point out which page she's on, because she's got such a package here.
Thank you.
The town offices can be found on D1. Well, I don't know if I can follow that brief of a presentation, but I will do my best. The town offices includes program budgets for the town council, the offices of the elected clerk and town treasurer, the town attorney's office, and the self-liability fund. And this year we recommend a status quo budget for the town offices programs, and in general we really anticipate no significant expenditure increases. There are two areas worth note, and that is in the Office of the Town Attorney and Self-Insurance Liability Fund. The Office of the Town Attorney does have a slight increase in their expenditures, and that's due to the continued use of contractual legal services, specifically to provide support for litigation and claims issues. Given this continued use of these services, we're going to be reducing the amount of support that the clerk department currently provides the attorney's office. With respect to the self-insurance liability fund, there is again a slight rise in the budgeted operating expenditure levels. Again, this is due to a reallocation of an FTE, which is an MIS specialist, and that's essentially to provide insurance coordination support. And we do not expect any significant increases in insurance premiums this year. Moving on to the Administrative Services Department, this can be found on D21, and this includes the Town Manager's Office, the MIS Department, the clerk office, the customer service, human resources, and finance departments. And again, with previous years, we do recommend continued structural changes in these departments, and most likely it will improve service delivery. I'd like to start with the Human Resources and Town Manager's Office. Staff does propose a reduction in the existing Human Resource Specialist positions and an addition of an Administrative Analyst position, which would be split between the Human Resources Department and the Town Manager's Office. I would like to point out that this cost of the position is offset through the reduction of the Human Resource Specialist positions and a defunding of the Deputy Clerk position, which is in the Clerk Department. The new administrative analyst will provide analytical support in the area of recruitment, benefit administration, training, labor negotiations, legislation, and special projects as assigned. Moving to the clerk and MIS department, again, additional structural changes here. These changes include a partial reallocation of yours truly, the administrative programs manager, to provide departmental oversight in the clerk department. And we do have a change in the management information system with the MIS specialist, which will again be reallocated to provide contract and insurance administrative support that I mentioned earlier. Staffing modifications are also recommended for the MIS department to basically assist in the growing management needs of our information technology system requirements. Currently, the network administrator provides support for both townwide information technology services and the police department, and we're recommending that we fully allocate the administrator to the police department given its growing technology needs. And to meet this gap that occurs with respect to helping townwide systems management, we do recommend a part-time IT help desk support position that would be added. And this, again, this position is offset through community development fees to support the online permit tracking system, which is slated to start in a couple of months. And then the remaining part of this new position would be offset by the reallocation of the MIS specialist to the self-insurance liability fund and the clerk department. Moving on to finance, with respect to finance, the budget does reflect an increase in salary and benefits. Most of this is due to a series of reclassifications to more accurately match the position to the duties that are currently performed. And again, we will continue to coordinate and manage the upgrade of the finance and personnel information systems project. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Hariyama? Seeing none, thank you very much for a very thoroughgoing presentation. And the next presentation will be, all right.
We're ready to move to the capital budget.
Well, I think before you do that, we do have some public comment. Okay.
On the operating, yes.
And this is item 10A, and this is the point where public can comment. All the departments have finished, correct? Am I correct? All right. So, Mr. Davis? Yeah.
Yes, under the annual budget, operating budget, is it possible we can have a new bulb for the projection? Is that possible? You know, I go to Saratoga, the council. I go to Montessorino, and they light up the screen beautifully. I come here, it's blurred. Does anybody care about the public? We'll see at the next meeting whether you get rid of the dim bulb or not. On Mr. Conway's report, one thing he left out was the fact we now have about $68 million in reserves. Okay, transparent, Mr. Conway. Thank you. And guess how much that's earning? About 5% annually. That's between 3 and 4 mil a year. Not a word about where that 3 or 4 mil goes. Not a word. Is that some kind of a slush fund? Somebody have a little private deal going? What's going on? I think it ought to be on the table. Transparent, Mr. Conway. You know, I attended the Planning Commission meeting when the same agenda item was brought up. And the Planning Commission saw fit on a unanimous vote to request that your presentation tonight include specifics on what you can do in this coming year on the trail system for Los Gatos. I didn't hear one word about direction from the Planning Commission. Not one word. A unanimous vote. Who short circuits what the Planning Commission recommends? Who? Lastly, you know, some time ago, the council saw fit to include an item for replacement of all the missing sidewalks on the way to school for the school kids in Los Gatos, okay? It was a study that was ordered. Now, that was due in May. It's not ready, according to the man from Public Works, but it will be ready next month, all right, because he's seen fit to farm it out. It's being farmed out, and it is vitally important that the kids of this community on their way to school be reasonably safe.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay?
Davis.
So I want you to know, we and the school board are looking forward to performance.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right. That concludes 10A. We're coming up to 10B, and I'm going to ask if we can take a very short break. 3 to 5 minutes. The Vice Mayor will be back in 5. Gentlemen, we're going to recommence. This is item 10B. It's the capital improvement program for fiscal year 2007 to 2012.
I'm just going to very briefly maybe point out the obvious before I turn it over to Steve, and then Kevin will take you through the capital budget. What I've asked Kevin to do is only identify those new projects, not describe them, because again, I know you've done your homework, and we'll go section by section and answer any questions that you have. But what I wanted to just point out, again, it's obvious, but this budget really contains a very impressive list of projects that have been completed, and then an ambitious 5-year plan. And we know that our funding is primarily from leftover general fund money. So I did want to thank Kevin and his staff for their fantastic work on this capital budget. It's kind of amazing that it wasn't until 2002 that we did bring a town engineer back on, and the engineering team has really been built since that point in time. And on Kevin's part, I am just continually impressed at how much he knows about the town, all the nooks and crannies where things can go wrong, and his vigilance has really been very important in his being able to bring to you the kinds of things that you see funded in this capital budget. So again, I just wanted to acknowledge that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Deborah. Mayor Przinski, members of council, members of the public. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the fiscal year 2007-08 through 2011-12 5-year capital improvement plan for the town and the redevelopment agency of Los Gatos. The capital improvement plan, this, as we refer to it, the CIP document, I wanted to talk a little bit about what is that plan. Well, really what it is a 5-year plan that tries to prioritize and fund the high priority capital investments the town plans on making over the next 5 years, and identifying appropriate funding sources or legal funding sources for those. If we can move to the next slide. It's important because we do this plan and we update it every year because it does give us a framework to approach more methodically our infrastructure priorities town-wide. And it also envisions a longer planning scenario than the typical operating budget, which is normally a 12-month cycle. This goes out over 60 months, so it provides us a longer planning window and a longer planning window for estimating our reliable sources of funding that we would have to accomplish the CIP. So it's important from that aspect. Our project priorities are, as in this CIP, as in prior years, are based on a few key factors. One is the council's strategic priorities, which council just met and affirmed this recently. I believe it was in March or February. Excuse me, February, I believe it was, for your council retreat. And in that retreat, you, as a council, emphasized the importance of maintaining public facilities and also infrastructure, maintaining the public infrastructure, especially the transportation systems and the retaining walls in those areas of critical infrastructure. We also try to address projects which contribute to the health and safety of the public. That gets a high priority. The community inputs that the Public Parks and Public Works and other departments receive on community needs. And then we take all those competing priorities and match them with available funding sources and revenue streams. In some cases, you may have a project which may have a lower priority overall than another, but it has already an identifiable revenue stream where we have some grant funding available. So it may rise up in priority only because it has a dedicated revenue stream, not because it was more of a higher priority project, whereas another project may be a higher priority, but it doesn't have as many funding opportunities, and so it may slip. But it's a little bit of a give and take on that, where we have priorities matched with funding sources that may rise higher than those that don't have available revenues or ways to fund them. Our financial planning we do to assist the manager's office and Parks and Public Works and all the departments in crafting the CIP is we update our current cost estimates every spring on our projects. All that includes the carryover projects that are part of this plan plus the new projects. And then we have a revenue stream that we have out there in the future that we update for our capital program, and those are, and the revenues and expenditures are all updated with current costs and current estimates of future revenue. And as council is aware, we appropriate, and the public should know this, only the first year of the 5-year plan is actually legally appropriated. So it is a plan, it remains a plan, it is subject to change. The 5 years are not inked in stone. They are just a planning document, but it is very valuable from a planning perspective. We do confirm with the manager that all the funding in the 5-year plan is solid funding. There is funds committed or set aside for this plan. So all the projects you see tonight on your funded list or recommended list all have committed funding sources available for them, so that unless otherwise indicated, that's correct. And I wanted to mention, we had a speaker mention this, but this was in the bulleted points, that the Planning Commission has also reviewed this document at an April meeting, and their role legally is to opine as to the plan's conformance and conformity with the general plan, and they did so. However, they did emphasize that and made a strong urge to the council that the council continue to look for ways to fund trails and pedestrian and bikeway enhancements to the town's transportation system and to the parks and the trails. So that was a planned comment for tonight. If we can move to the CIP funding is from 3 primary sources. It's the ongoing operating revenues that we craft. We have sufficient revenues this year where we actually have recommended an increase to that operating dedicated revenue that we send to the GFAR fund for capital financing. That has been increased, and we also have prior year savings from the prior year that went into the reserve for future and special projects. That is another available funding source, and of course that remains our primary funding source for new projects. And then any debt financings that we have done where we have remaining balances, and in the RDA we have around $360,000 remaining funds effective July 1 from our 2002 COP. Any new debt issues would also be potentially funding sources that could fund a enhancement to the 5-year CIP at some point in time. But those are our primary. I won't go into much detail on this, but what I will say is if a careful look at this pie chart will tell you or show you that there's a significant investment in our transportation system, including what one category of the retaining walls are in the street maintenance and safety pie wedge. We have bridge work we anticipate in the 5-year plan and a large amount of street reconstruction. So you can see roughly the three of the 70, probably 70% of that pie is on our transportation and safety and maintenance of our roads and retaining walls and that sort of work. So there's a heavy emphasis on that in the 07-08 budget CIP. It's talked about in great detail in the transmittal to the CIP, but we continue to try to fund a goal on our street investment in our streets. We've had consultants as late as 2003 informing us that we had a goal to keep our streets PCI, Pavement Condition Index is what PCI stands for at its current level of 75. We were recommended to invest, and this was in 2003 dollars, $1.5 million to $2 million per year in our streets to keep them. We are now in this plan able to recommend a $1.2 million revenue stream dedicated for streets, which is good news because because that came from some of our new Prop 42 financing and Prop 1B financing that we are getting from the state that we can put into the transportation system. So that's good news, and that should be some ongoing annual revenue, at least for 5 years, that we can plan on using and utilizing. But we're still a small amount short of that goal. We keep looking at different revenue alternatives to reach that $1.5 million to $2 million goal, and look for ways to increase that investment, and always we'll be looking at that as we find available revenues from our year-end savings that will go in. As you know, council policy, half of that goes into our capital program. So there is continuing hope that if we maintain budget savings in the future, we'll have excess revenues that we can apply for our transportation network, into our transportation network. That's the extent of my comments on the overview of the CIP. I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Conway. Questions from council? Seeing none, then I think we can move right on to the capital improvement program itself.
And again, Mr. Mayor, we'll go just section by section. So first would be streets.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. And Mr. Rouhani is going to make that presentation.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, again, it's my pleasure to very briefly go over some of the highlights of the capital program for the upcoming fiscal year. I will simply touch upon some of the titles of the project and by program, and be happy to answer specific questions. Over the past years, the department has been actively, as with the previous years, engaged in development and process of a wide range of capital improvement projects, both on the streets, parks, and facilities. In fact, at your next meeting, we will be bringing you a number of projects for contracts for award and acceptance. That's an ongoing work for us, and we'll continue to pursue those projects. As far as the new projects that are being proposed for fiscal year 07-08 under the streets program, we have the reconstruction of Elm Street, and we have a pilot project to rehabilitate the concrete streets, curbs, gutters, and sidewalks in Almond Grove area, which has been long overdue. And there will be a project to enhance the lighting, the street lighting system along Santa Cruz Avenue. As a part of some of our ongoing projects that we have multi-year, as Director of Finance mentioned, is our annual street resurfacing, which we have come up with fundings of over $1 million, and we expect to do a fairly good-sized project to resurface the streets. We have the work ongoing on Highway 9 improvements, which we will be bringing a report to the council in June next month for acceptance of the plans and specification and authorization to go out to bid as the pedestrian and bicycle enhancements. Roberts Road Bridge, the design will get underway in the very near future, and also the work on the conceptual design on the gateways along Highway 9 and Santa Cruz and University Avenue will be underway this year. Again, that's just briefly on the streets. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, let's address streets first, and we'll start with the Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, I apologize for interrupting, but if there's going to be a discussion of Almond Grove, I should probably recuse myself because I live there.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. I appreciate that. We'll see if we go in that direction. Okay.
All right.
Vice Mayor Speckman.
Question. Borrowing from a phraseology I think that Mr. Glickman often uses is, I for one, council person, on C8, on page C8, talking about Elm Street, and I see that this is in the design phase in December of 2007 through completion of April of 2008. I, as one council person, would like that done sooner, if at all possible. And so the question is it conceivable that it could be done more quickly? Can it have a higher priority?
Yes, that project, even though it's for the size, it's in the downtown area, will require a certain amount of outreach, as we've done with other projects. It is possible to move that project depending on our, staffing level and getting the delivery done, possibly before fall and winter of this year in 2007. I anticipate the construction of that project will take no more than 1 week, similar to parking lot 5 next to it that we built. It would take basically 1 week to remove all the damaged pavement and resurfaces. So that's basically a 1 week project. Certainly there will be a lot of upfront work, but we could certainly try to move that project up.
Thank you. And the other one that would be a priority to me, although I'm sure it's a greater than 1 week project, is the rehabilitation of the hillside streets that is listed on pages C10 through 11. Thank you.
I would second the Vice Mayor's comments regarding Elm. I think that we all notice that that's basically the last street in the downtown, the CBD, that needs to be repaired, and it's in really, really bad shape. So if we could, Mr. Rouhani, if we could take a look at how that moves up in the calendar, that would be much appreciated.
We will certainly try. I think if I go back down the memory lane, all of our projects in the downtown, as we work with the merchants and the resident community, the kind of consensus was they would prefer the project to be done in the latter part of the summer where the school is out. So I think we can try to come up with a week toward the tail end of the summer before school begins to get that project built.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. I also had a question on timing, and it was of the hillside streets, and in particular those College, Reservoir Road, and so on. How do you recommend proceeding, considering that there's going to be construction up there on the development of those 4 homes in the subdivision? Is it better to, because those streets are very, very bad, to get them up to speed and up to quality, and then hope that the construction vehicles don't do too much damage, or wait until that construction is done?
On that project, the paving of the hillside street, that actually a project which is funded through State Transportation Improvement Grant. We have applied for a grant fund, and we expect to have that project basically built out in next year. This would be a 2008 project. Certainly with the development project that you mentioned, we will be coordinating with them to make sure, to the extent possible, all of the heavy activity related to those projects are done before we pave the road. So there will be a lot of close coordination with those projects, but essentially in the hillsides behind us, there is construction goes on every day. So we're trying to catch on the bigger projects, make sure those are the intense activities out of the way before we pave the road. But I anticipate before we go through all the Caltrans's processes, it will be sometime next year at the earliest.
Please.
And if I may, and the other one is on the Highway 9 gateway. I was a little disappointed that what is budgeted and what is in the work plan is kind of a next phase report. And my recollection of the council retreat is that we pretty much had unanimous interest, I think, in focusing on that and maybe giving that Highway 9 gateway a little bit more priority as part of an economic development strategy, as well as safety and beautification and all those other elements. So I'm wondering if that could be speeded up also, or if I'm not looking at the language in the way that you intended it.
Mr. Mayor, if I can respond.
Please.
And this proposal is still conceptual, so let me it's almost like a placeholder. But as we've talked as staff and kind of drawn a circle around that intersection and contemplated what might be going on at the shopping center, perhaps some of what's going to be happening up at 9 and University, we wanted to have it in context. So in a way, it's like a mini specific plan, a preliminary design about all the things that need to be considered. And given the workload in PPW, we wanted to put some funding to get consultants on board to help Kevin and his team take the last round of planning, which again was in concept, and then put some more meat to the bones before we could then really cost it out and bring you forward a proposal to fund it. If you remember, actually the first gateway that was supposed to be done was Wood Road because it was less expensive. This gateway at 9, I completely agree. I think it's going to do wonders for the entryway of the town, but it's probably well over $1 million. And so we felt it would be necessary to have a good preliminary design, and that might be one of the first calls that you would make on some redevelopment funding or maybe even traffic mitigation funds. So this will get us started, council members, is my point.
Thank you.
And I'd like to follow up then to the comment that the manager made. As regards the South Santa Cruz Wood Road intersection, that was intended also to be a traffic calming element, a roundabout, so that so we would take some of that high speed coming off of 17 northbound and divert it so that it slowed down, because we're still getting an awful lot of fast traffic off of Highway 17, and I do think that it is the intention, it has been the intention, to use that to kind of complete that part of the downtown streetscape program. But I agree with Ms. McNutt that we've got a couple of things here in both of these gateway projects that could see something developed more in this next year. Okay. Other comments to the streets program? Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Another question. First of all, I agree with the Highway 9 gateway. I understand that we have the bicycle safety issue coming through that juncture. I also know that we're working on the lights and the configuration at University, but I would like a priority, to the extent that it can be, placed on the gateway at Highway 9. Then a question. I've expressed concern in the past, at least to Ms. Fagoni, about funding CIP projects with community benefit, and I see that on pages C37 through C45, the funding sources are community benefit assessments. However, they are not for the current year 2007-08, and so my question would be the basis for stating that there would be community benefit assessments to finance these projects.
Those community benefits assessments that you alluded to, they have been paid by developers from several years ago for that intersection, is sitting on an account that to be used for that project.
And would that be the case in all of these situations, C37, C41, C43, and C45?
Why don't you flip through it, Kevin, and then see. So,
yes.
What is the name of the project, Vice Mayor?
All right, the first one is Highway 9. The second one is Hernandez. The third one is Winchester Lark.
Yes. Winchester Lark is a development, and they are paid for that.
All right, and the last one is Los Gatos Boulevard Lark.
Correct, both of those.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it relates to the question that was just raised, but it's a question for Mr. Conway, if I may.
Please.
Councilmember McNutt brought this up a little bit earlier, and it's something I've certainly given consideration to as well. And it was just indirectly addressed by Vice Mayor Spector, asking about, the money from developers used for that intersection, traffic mitigation fees, et cetera. And I don't know if there's some way, but if I can just toss this out to you, Mr. Finance Director, for future consideration, is over the years as the projects came forward, for instance, on that intersection, and various developers contributed to our pot, which we call a general ledger account traffic mitigation. And that amount is accrued and accrued and accrued, and now we're looking at 2010-11 to apply those dollars that have been paid over the years. I assume that number that's there, the $640,000 on C-37, is the dollar amounts that have been contributed over the years by developers for various projects. Yet the estimated expense is a 2010 estimate of expenses. And so one thing I just throw out there for you to deal with someday, somehow, some way, is we put in present dollars and we let the interest that they accrue and that they earn go into the general fund. Well, over the years, for instance, $600,000 came in from traffic mitigation fees. And some of those dollars could have been sitting in that account for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And yet the expenses that we apply them to are current expenses. The reason I'm thinking about this is I'm thinking about, we talked about earlier the sale of the sewer assets. And that dollar amount went into an account. And it will stay that dollar amount until we transfer it or apply it somewhere else. If the sale of the property in Vasona goes through, that dollar amount I'd like to see go into an account. And then if somewhere down the road our successors decide to apply those monies to some other project somewhere else, it would be kind of misleading to say, here's $6 million towards this $10 million, if the $6 million's been sitting there for 3 or 4 years, when it really has increased in value just by the interest it's earned to $7.5 million. Is there any way accounting-wise to take care of that?
Councilmember Wasserman, yes, there would be. That would be, of course, to accrue interest to the traffic mitigation fees account. Right now, the town, unless legally obligated, does not typically accrue interest to specific accounts, and that would be a laborious process if we did it townwide for every account. So it's more for practical purposes. We don't. What I'm unsure of, and I will get back to council on this, is we may, in the instance of traffic mitigation, be applying interest to that account. I'm just unsure as I sit here tonight. I just don't recall specifically if that particular account. Some of our accounts do get accrued interest, and that may be one of them. But I will.
And Mr. Conway, I certainly understand it would be laborious, and I'm not looking to take the interest earned at the end of each month and spread it across 87 accounts. Yeah. I'm not thinking that. But what I am thinking is at a certain point, like Vice Mayor Spector's question here about the source of funds, community benefit assessment, traffic mitigation, those dollars that are there, what you reflect in here is the dollars collected. And I understand that and I appreciate that. What would help me might be a little asterisk at the bottom that says these $640,000 were collected between 2003 and 2007, and using 5% simple interest, they become $750,000. You know what I mean? So it doesn't look like we're not collecting as much as we should. We're in a cost recovery, and when we collected those dollars as traffic mitigation fees, it was based on this is your traffic mitigation fee for what you're causing our traffic.
Right.
So I'm just throwing that out there because it tied in once there and it tied in once there, and it tied into a concern I had about park funds, and I'm done. Thank you.
I will note that, and in our Penimation upgrade, there might be some additional capacity we may have to track to that level of detail in our new financial system that we're installing. That should help us too.
Okay, Madam Manager.
And the other thing I want to ensure that as far as the 640 for the traffic mitigation funds that are shown, that I want to have the staff confirm whether or not those are in hand right now or anticipated. So I think we just need to clarify, at least for this project, since you shed some light on it.
Okay. If I may, we're still on streets and roads. Do the retaining walls fall into that category?
Yes.
Okay. On page C22, you talk about the repairs to, you listed 11, I think the count is 11 retaining walls that are problematic, and you listed them in order of priority. Okay. And then I noticed that you are going to repair Cleveland in 07-08 and so forth. When you've evaluated these, Mr. Rouhani, in determining priority, are any of the ones in the top of this priority list actually in danger of failing now at any time? And is that basically how you determine priority?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We inspect these walls as our inspectors drive around town and we look at them. There are some who are in different state of disrepair. We had a wall failed on Villa Avenue just behind us, and that's the contract which is out to bid. We will bring in a report to you at the next meeting for awarded contract. So all of these walls, we inspect them on a regular basis, get their status condition, and sometimes we have to reshuffle the order of magnitude. For instance, the one that we have on top at Cleveland Avenue above the pageant ground, that's actually, there is not a retaining wall. That's a very steep hillside. It's been very unstable. As we expected it, it was our determination that a retaining wall really is going to be needed, because in case of let's say if we have a very, very wet winter or some geologic condition, it would be very possible that that entire hillside would come down on pageant ground and some of this facilities. So we look at them from both certainly health and safety is paramount, but also their conditions. Some of them, most of these walls have been built many years ago, basically wood posts and wood beams around it without any kind of reinforcement on any kind of pressure coating. So just as the walls that we have replaced over the past few years, time has caught up with them. So it's just a continuous thing that we inspect and try to prioritize these things based on what we observe.
Then in terms of the execution of this priority list, is it fair to say that your staff in its evaluation is willing to increase the activity in relationship to the repairs if you notice that the deterioration is enhanced at a certain point? Because I did a little bit of drive-by the last couple of days to see some of these, and it seems like some at face value look relatively stable, or the hillside behind them is not that significant. So that if there was a failure, it wouldn't cause much damage. On the other hand, there are some that are fairly decent vertical holes of a lot of hillside with structures above them. And so I guess the question is it within your frame of reference to, in your evaluation, move things up the scale, or to see if we can actually fast track some more of these and get some of these retaining walls fixed within a shorter time frame?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, as you might have observed over the past 2-3 years, the walls that we have built on Jackson, on Reservoir, on Villa and Kimball, these were the walls that were right at the edge of the roadway, and if the roadway would fail, the whole roadway would be down in a creek. We built a wall on Oak Hill Way last year. That was just the whole roadway had sunk. So we're constantly trying to reprioritize, make sure that the public facilities are not endangered in any way.
Okay. And could I ask a question about University at the Dam?
University of the Dam, yes. Some of those old-fashioned walls, some of them have failed. We plan to actually do some repairs to them this summer with our own staff.
All right, because I didn't see those on the list.
Right. No, those are, we're going to take care of those internally.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Glickman.
Just a technical question on retaining walls, because I get the sense that they have a finite and not all that long lifetime, and then we end up repairing them. Is there an option in the state of the art that if we, and perhaps it involves spending a little bit more money, putting in retaining walls that will last longer than perhaps the generic variety does?
Our approach has been, especially with the understand the culture and the aesthetic element of the town. We could build all of these like concrete, a typical concrete retaining wall that you see around. Those, I thought, from a cost perspective and from aesthetics perspective, probably wouldn't be the best of walls for a lot of our hillside roads. A great majority, if not all of the walls that we have, and they have failed or similar to the wall on Villa, these walls have hardly any reinforcement. They're basically either an 8x8 or 6x6 wood post drilled into the ground with 2x6s or 2x12 just nailed on the back of them without any kind of a drainage, and the lumber that we take out, doesn't seem to be any pressure treated in them. So that's why just time has caught up with them. The new walls that we build, we try to build them kind of the rustic walls to blend in with the scenery, and we use steel beams as the main post and pressure-treated lumber as far as the main structure element of the walls, and actually put a drainage system in the back of these walls so they can drain. A lot of these walls, just water comes behind them, has nowhere to go, starts rotting out the wood, and there goes the wall. So I anticipate the newer walls that we have built, again, all around, just behind us, would last easily 34 years without any kind of major maintenance that's going to be needed. And they're, from our perspective, the most economical walls that we can build around here with the least amount of impact to the area.
Thank you. Madam Manager.
Point out, Mr. Mayor, to your question about if walls had to be accelerated, that GFAR line on C23 is an indication of what Steve had mentioned earlier, in that the money for the retaining walls that are planned, at least that stream of $200,000 a year, actually is in place in cash. So if we had to accelerate, or conversely, if one of the walls was more expensive than what we expected, there is a funding here to either move up or to add more money to one of the projects. So I just want to point that out.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Other comments or questions from council? Then should we press forward to Parks?
Okay. In the Parks program, there are two projects that I will touch upon. One is the Bachman Park irrigation upgrade, and the other one is Los Gatos Creek Trail railing and fencing upgrade, especially on the Creek Trail. Similarly with the retaining walls that I mentioned over the years, a lot of those split rail fences, they were just driven into the ground, and they're without any kind of reinforcement, and the wood has been decomposed, and these fences have failed. So we have about 2,000 foot of fencing that would be replaced along the Creek Trail. And Bachman Park irrigation, as we know, this is a system that's been old for quite some time, has been dysfunctional. We have it designed. We were not going to take it, do the improvement this summer because of the park usage. It will be constructed this fall and winter. I'll be happy to answer any questions on the parks.
Thank you. Questions from council? Mr. Glickman.
Comment, because one of the projects is one that I've been dear to my heart for a while, is the skate park project. Just to mention, it is challenging for young and not organized in the sense that say the organized sports folks are, to raise $750,000. And perhaps there was a time when the town was very, very tight for funds. We were in difficult economic times, when it looked like private sources were just funding everything right and left. It's been an awful long time, and the young folks in town continue to do the best they can to raise those funds. When we look around at cities near us, Capitola just decided they're going to put in a skate park. There was a discussion in the newspaper, and they're saying, well, should we do it from this fund or that fund? But it was with public money. And it's for us to decide, it's for the council to decide what are appropriate uses of public funds. And sometimes it's hard to make a judgment call. I mean, is it appropriate to use it for streets? Yes, of course it is. Would it be appropriate to build a theater? Probably not, because that's something that's of interest to a relatively small number of people. Where does the idea of a skate park fall? And I think that the situation in other cities around the country has changed. You drive to little towns and they're putting in skate parks, and they're accepting that as an appropriate use of public funds. So then the other question is, well, does our community support it? Because there are some issues we never got very much input. But we did a survey. We did it a few years ago, and there's some question as to whether it's changed. We haven't done another one. where the folks in town were saying, yeah, this is very important to us. So I would again suggest to my fellow council members that since, as we saw before, we have some significant funds available in our reserve accounts and our capital accounts, since I see more and more kids using skateboards, that it might be time to reconsider the appropriateness of using more public money to support this. In the meantime, the fundraising effort goes on. I know because I'm involved in it. But there's been a generation of kids who didn't have a skate park in town when they could have. They'll continue to work on it, but I do think that it's becoming clearer and clearer that this is something that would be appropriate for us to use some public money for, more than we've appropriated to date.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. Any other comments at this time? Hearing none, then that takes us to public facilities.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. On the public facilities, there are two projects I would highlight. One is at the Civic Center ADA improvements, which the proposal is to install automatic doors for entrances to the downstairs at the planning and building department, and the doors so people with disabilities can use those automatic doors for access to the facilities. Also doing a major enhancement to the elevator at the library. That elevator has some deficiencies for people with disabilities, and that project is going to be funded through CDBG funds to address ADA issues here. And last, at the neighborhood center, the kitchen is destined for some improvements. Some sinks, cabinets, some fixtures, I understand, to get a facelift to the kitchen at the neighborhood center. And that concludes that part of the report.
Public facilities comments? Vice Mayor Spector?
Thank you. You got me when I still had a candy. On page E27, the equipment projects. A question and then a comment. Question is, would this include a new screen for us here in the council chambers?
Jenny can jump in here if I'm incorrect. Probably not a new screen, maybe, but I do know that we're looking at the lighting systems, and because, as council knows, they're either all on or all off when we present. And probably, Jen, how are we going to handle these?
We can definitely give a new screen consideration. However, the lighting problem is probably more of a priority in terms of the visual impact. And then again, we can go ahead and evaluate the availability of funds for a screen. That doesn't remedy the problem.
Okay. Well, again, speaking as one council person, I would like, however you get there, either with a new screen or with the lighting or whatever the technical path is, to have a screen in here that we in the council can see. I meant the council people. And so I would appreciate that.
Other comments, Mr. Glickman?
Yes, thank you. Under the listing of projects, I was looking at page E1, and I was encouraging us to consider spending more money on the skate park, and now I'm going to encourage us to spend a bit of less money on a different project, and that's the Civic Center Library Master Plan. If I look at page B6, it looks like we've got $100,000 budgeted towards that project for a total of over $400,000. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, sometimes we have to use our best judgment as to what our public would like us to spend their money on. But sometimes you had some input, and recently we did a survey, and I know there were folks who were very enthusiastic about this, but the results came back from our public saying that they were less enthusiastic, that they weren't prepared to come up with the money, additional money to fund it. So I'm troubled by going ahead and preparing to spend their money, which is what we do, on something where we've had recent input saying that they're not so enthusiastic about it. Now, we have talked about, I think the word was educating the public. which is not a bad thing to inform the public about why we think things are important. I just, as long as we don't segue into selling something, because that's not really our role. But where we stand today, the most recent input we've gotten is that this is not a project that the public wholeheartedly supports. And so I think maybe spending more money on it at this point is putting the cart a bit before the horse. I think that maybe that education and outreach, as long as it's done appropriately, should come first. And if the enthusiasm rises, then we'll spend more money. But where we stand now, I'm really struggling to convince myself that it's appropriate to be spending $100,000 on a project that the public has not told us they're terribly enthusiastic about.
Okay, I do want to make comment to that. I believe the survey you're referring to is the polling we did in preparation for the Civic Center Master.
Yes, it is.
Well, by my recollection, pardon me, by my recollection, without much information available, because there was a large percentage of the population that really had not heard about Civic Center Master Plan, that there was over 57% that was indicating an interest or a favor. Pardon me. Over 57% that was indicating a favorable response to supporting the project. Now, the reason why the numbers are difficult is because if we're going to go out for bond, it requires that we have a 67% buy-in. And so I think that it's probably not that accurate to indicate that there isn't a community buy-in when you have well over half the community without any information indicating that they are positive about the library portion of the Civic Center Master Plan. I think that the $100,000 that is proposed, as I understand it, is to do outreach to the community, to raise consciousness, to raise awareness, and that if that has been completed, then there'll be a greater understanding on the community's part, and then they can go back to a subsequent poll and indicate whether they are truly interested in funding this or not. But that, to me, I mean, I think the fact that above a majority of the community without any information was indicating a willingness to support is actually a significant piece of information for us to ponder. Ms. McNutt?
Thank you. I guess I also read this a little bit differently, because my interpretation of what was here is that this $100,000 is a placeholder depending on what council decides to do when the master plan comes to us in June. If we decide that we want to do something other than bind it and put it on a shelf in the library, that there needs to be some funds to start moving it along. So the phrasing that's here is potentially including, so I didn't interpret that as meaning this is exactly how this money would be spent in terms of community outreach, polling, or anything else. But so I'm looking to staff to clarify. But just that those could be, but it would be based on whatever council direction we give in June when we talk about the Civic Center Master Plan.
Placeholder is a good term. When the master plan does come back before you, we'll provide you recommendations on next steps. Staff's thinking is that if you are going to proceed on, let's say, a library first, to see where the community support is, you probably have to start developing some conceptual design work in order to show them. And so it is going to take that kind of investment. The degree of investment, how far you want to take it, is certainly subject to council discussion, but this is a placeholder for that purpose.
Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you. I'd like to address the subject as far as library, skateboard park. You can go venue, you can go a lot of different places. It's my impression, and I believe council consensus, that this town needs a new library. We did a needs assessment, and we need a new library at 50 to 100%. I don't even remember what the numbers are anymore. We need a new library. We have thousands of people a day, from little ones to seniors, using our library. There has been a town effort of a donation of land, of money, and the allocation of Montecito's $100,000 all towards the skate park. And I keep coming back to this same point, and that is that action speaks louder than words. In 5 years of fundraising, there's been, whatever, $10,000 or $15,000, whatever the number is, raised by the public to fund a new skate park. I am more than convinced that if we had spent the last 5 years raising funds for the library, that there would be over $15,000 in the pot. What this $100,000 placeholder, as it's been said, is another step towards the ultimate goal of getting Los Gatos a new library. We had to do a civic center master plan. We broke that down into phases. We have a place where a library can go and be built without affecting any other structures. This is a long, drawn-out process that costs a lot of money that I'm totally convinced our community wants. And I don't think, I agree with you, Mayor Brzezinski, I don't think our community was actually properly asked, do you want a new library? Because if you ask the thousands of people that use it every single week, the answer would be an overwhelming yes. And it is an expensive process, but that's reality. And the reality also is, as far as the skate park issue, is the town's donated land, donated money, Montecito's donated money, and that's over 50% of the total project, and it's time for the community, if they really want a skate park, to come up with the rest of the monies. And I hate, well, never mind.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I'm going to get back to the survey, because I think I've said this before, and that is the survey when the population, when our residents were given general questions about do they want a new police station, do they want a new library, when the questions were posed in that general way, there was not a 2/3 positive vote. There was a more than 50% vote, but not a 2/3. However, if you go about 3/4 of the way through that survey and you get toward the end, there were specific questions asked about the police and about the library. They were very specifically and carefully crafted questions, and the response to those specifically crafted questions was, I think, a 70% or a little more than 70% positive response.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman.
There's, I think, an old saying about statistics, but perhaps we read the survey differently. I think that Councilwoman and Vice Mayor Spector made a very good point, that different parts of the survey asking different questions got different responses. But there's one part of the survey that I remember where we told people how much it was going to cost them. And again, the town manager will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if we said we were going to pay for this by bonding, and if we pay for it other ways, then we may have to make it up. So it's the public's money one way or the other. That the cost, rough figures, was for every $10 million that we needed to raise, the cost to the taxpayer would be $10 for every $100,000 of assessed value on our property. Is that correct? Okay. When we we estimated the Civic Center Master Plan, I believe, at $87 million. Was that the last figure?
That's the entire...
The entire project.
Not just the library.
Not just the library. Which then would have cost somebody whose home was assessed at $1 million, $870 additionally a year on their property tax. When we asked if they'd pay anything like that, the support went down to 30%. Now, if a library is a $30 million project, and I'm kind of pulling the figure out of my head, it wasn't clear if we said, well, would you pay an additional $300 a year in property tax to have a new library, whether we would have had 70% say yes. It's very different than saying, would you like a new library? Well, sure, I'd also like a new car. So I really think that we have to tell the people what is really involved in what we're discussing, whether it's a part of the project or the whole project. I mean, by comparison, $1 million skate park project, for which we, at this point, probably need another $500,000, would cost that same property owner $5 a year. Would they pay that for a skate park? That's a rather different question. So I think that before we move forward on something that's that significant, that we ask the tough questions and see what people tell us. And as I've always said, and I've been looking at the Civic Center project for a couple of years at least, I've always said, but I need to know whether the public, when they know what it'll cost them, will support it. And unfortunately, the part of the survey that I focused on was when we did tell them how much it was going to cost them, it wasn't 70% support, it was 30%. So I continue to struggle with that.
I do want to make one comment here, and it's in reference to something that Mr. Glickman hinted at, and it's that it was a kind of a throwaway line about statistics. My guess is you threw that in as if we shouldn't evaluate statistics, or statistics could be used to lie or something like that?
No, and Mr. Mayor, I want to be clear on that. I did not suggest that anybody is lying. I'm suggesting that we can focus on different parts of the same study to come to rather different conclusions.
Okay. And obviously the dichotomy that's being presented tonight is skate park versus library. I mean, and we were putting...
Skate park versus Civic Center master plan.
Well, you know, I think that we've gone beyond, in our own discussion as council, beyond the Civic Center master plan with our introduction of the off-siting of the police facility. That changes the dynamic very significantly. We have a meeting on, the first meeting in June, I believe it is, where we're going to take the last look perhaps at the master plan, so there's probably discussion that should be centered there. But, you know, I think that it's an interesting discussion. I think there would be an interesting question to ask our public related to the skate park as well, because the phraseology of the question in that earlier survey was, do you have enough skate parks? And I guess if you answer that question, you'd have to say no, because there were none. That's exactly what the phrase of that question was. So perhaps there could be a point in time where we resurvey and say to our publics, do you want a skate park? And are you willing to pay for that skate park X number of dollars? If we want to parallel the discussion we're having now. Ms. McNutt.
Well, I was just going to say that this item's been agendized for June, and I don't really understand why we're spending so much time talking about it tonight. We don't have our documents here. We don't have the public here to talk about it. I think we need to close off this discussion and wait for when it's on the agenda on June, is it June 4th?
Mm-hmm.
Second,
okay, then
second meeting?
Currently the 18th.
The 18th?
Yes, we had moved it back.
Whenever it is in June, and then we'll have all of the data here. We'll have people here, and we'll be able to talk about it. But I think we should finish this off tonight.
I appreciate what you say, Ms. McNutt, but I think it's appropriate that, given the nature of the discussion, that we be able to vet somewhat the issues that are in front of us. Okay. Any other comments to be made? All right. Any more comments about public facilities, Mr. Rouhani?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Then that brings us to public comments. And again, Citizen Ray Davis, would like to speak to item 10B.
Wow. Wow. Where's the public? I guess I got to represent the public. Okay? And I want to tell you, if I may say so, I'm speaking mainly to people I consider heavyweights on this council, and that's Wasserman, the mayor, and Ms. Spector. I do not understand why the issue of the missing sidewalks in this town gets some priority in the CIP from you three people, the heavyweights. Doesn't that register with you? If it doesn't, go spend a portion of an afternoon and go over to Fisher School, Fisher School, that's 310, and see the mass of kids that fill Mitchell Avenue, because there's no place to walk. And Mitchell is right next to the school. It's an abomination. And I want to tell you, we're going to organize. I'm working with the school board, and we're going to get that done with your help or without it. Some way, somehow. Okay? The rest are peripheral issues, in my opinion. Kids' safety, public safety for the kids first. Also, I can't believe all this stick in the mud talk about the skateboard park. Stick in the muds. Wasserman, you're a stick in the mud. In Orinda, all we did was form a 3-city compact to fund the skateboard park of the 3 communities, okay? This was about 5, 6 years ago. I had a big portion of that, all right? Moraga put up the land, and without any big deal, Wasserman, no big deal. They put up the land because they had it available. And then the 3 cities said, we'll build a skateboard park, about $1 million, Class A park. And we'll split the cost 3 ways. Without too much talk, too much nonsense. They just did it. It's up there right now, and why isn't anybody going from here going up to take a look at it? It's a beautiful example of what can be done by the communities with public money, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
And I won't go away on it.
Thank you. Well, I think that with that public comment, it's time for us to draw close to our financial discovery tonight. And again, want to thank all members of staff, from the manager to all the department heads, for the excellent work that we have been given to allow us to do one of the most significant things we do, if not the most significant, and that is make sure that our public funds are appropriately shepherded and that services are appropriately delivered to our community. We stand in great position with our finances, and we, again, continue to serve the community in an excellent manner in all aspects of those things that are appropriate for government to serve the community with. So, again, thank you, manager, thank you, staff, for a job really well done. And now we're going to go to the rest of the agenda, which at this point is to return to the consent items. There were 2 items pulled from consent, items 3 and 9. And Mr. Davis, I'd ask if you could kind of combine the 2 of those. We'll hear you out on both. Item 3 is to adopt the resolution granting an appeal of a planning commission decision to deny an application for single-family residence on Reservoir Road. That would be Lot 3 on Reservoir Road. Mr. Davis.
Yes, my concerns are as follows. The resolution that's before you, Section I, says the decision of the Planning Commission was incorrect. Incorrect is hereby reversed. And the motion that was made and seconded on the appeal was not to find any fault with the action of the Planning Commission. Period. I know that. So how come that's in there? So I urge you to reword that and emphasize, what is the truth, and that is the Planning Commission felt it was beyond their jurisdiction, and they didn't want a clarification. That was the basic appeal. Okay, so I urge you not to find fault as this resolution does, and I also urge you to put some language in here that speaks to the main thrust of the appeal. Okay, and the fact was that home was a beautiful step up and down type home, okay, which is 80 to 90% of a home that blends with the natural setting, which is your main thrust in the Hillside Design Guidelines. It's a main thrust of the general plan. General plan states that homes on the mountainside must step up and down because there's a slope. You cannot put a square box with a square box foundation, 2 stories, shove it into a hillside and have it blend. It is ugly. East San Jose, ugly. And that's what you've got to send a message to the Planning Commission that they are doing the right thing, okay? I've talked to several of them recently, and they are confused because you're sending a message of damned if they do and damned if they don't. So this resolution should be reworded to have the main thrust of the Hillside Design Guidelines and the general plan on mountainside lots within the wording of the resolution. Okay?
Item 9.
Then, so much for that. Then going to the minutes. You know, I'm still terribly concerned about the integrity, the lack of integrity in the minutes. Now, I brought up the issue with Mrs. McNutt, and in my opinion, her dishonesty and her deceit. And I spelled it out specifically, okay? And now we have what it says. I commented that there's a conflict of interest. It did not say a conflict of interest. I said there was dishonesty and deceit on her part. She lied.
Mr. Davis, can you wrap this up in 30
So
seconds?
I want the minutes to reflect exactly what I said.
Thank you. All right, Council, I turn to you for comment or motion.
I'll move to approve consent items 3 and 9.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay.
I didn't hear Mrs. Spector.
Yeah, she was in agreement. Next item on the agenda is council matters. Council? I see no council matters. Manager?
None.
Then this meeting is adjourned.